examine the question.
Yeah. See, here's what I want to know. Based on this quote, the commissioner said she had promised the Minister of Public Safety in the Prime Minister's office the RCMP would release this information. Did the Minister of Public Safety want that? Did the Prime Minister's office want that? Or did the commissioner offer that and promise that? Just who was leading whom there?
Well,
That's what I would want to know.
This way, though, too, Rob.
Okay.
If she's now been the commissioner for a long time. She's had interactions with this minister, this government. You get a feeling for knowing what they want, right? Mm-hmm. So did she need to be asked, right? Was she able to take the hint without actually having been asked to do it, right? Again, like there's something that builds up to this, right?
Right. Okay.
So
all right.
It in any way. It's bad, and honestly, if you're the government and you're being told this, right? They always had the ability to say, if they were getting the feeling that the commissioner was doing this to please them, say no, don't do it. Right?
Keep in mind the level of pressure that had been on the RCMP in the months before this on cases of sexual assault misconduct in the RCMP and wrongdoings of the RCMP. The commissioner has been called before committee. They were under fire. The RCMP have been under fire for a long time and in the public eye, and then this happened. So the timeline needs to be examined.
So look, add this, okay? Plus, Freedom Convoy Emergencies Act hearings not going well for the government. Mendocino under constant attack. Resign. The airports are a mess. You need to bring a tent and a sleeping bag if you want to get a passport. Inflation, now, the strongest in decades. True cost of living crisis. Housing prices down. Stock markets down. Liberals down in the polls behind the Conservatives. If you're the Prime Minister, how do you spend your summer, Cam?
Retirement plans?
Retirement plans. Okay, really?
Wow. I said I've been on the record of this since the last election that there would be 3 leadership campaigns that would happen, including theirs. So if you're going to be stepping out the door anyway, you've got a supply and confidence agreement that's going to put you through for another few years. You know what? Maybe now is the time to take that walk in the
sand. Sand for him. Sand. But, Tofino. Yeah. Long walk in the sand in Tofino. Surfboard in the hand. Okay, Kate. How does the Prime Minister spend his summer?
There needs to be a really big pivot and refocus on some core priorities here. Maybe it's a mini cabinet shuffle. Maybe there's some kind of a plan to hit the ground running in September.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line. Email us or connect with us on social media.
To transmit the power to the paddle, make sure that you have plenty of torso rotation, and be careful not to bend your wrists to reduce the chance of straining them.
As the fighting continues in Ukraine, thousands of people are fleeing for their lives, forced to leave everything behind. You can help them. Your donation to the Humanitarian Coalition will provide food, water, shelter, and medical care to the people of Ukraine who urgently need it. Call 1-855-461-2154 or donate online today at together.ca. That's together.ca. The Humanitarian Coalition. Together, saving more lives.
Join me for Season 3 of Paula Roy's Favorite Foods. Whew, that was a lot. I think I need a nap.
doesn't look like the right meeting. What's going on?
Gentlemen, bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. We'll start the meeting in 1 minute. On va commencer la réunion dans une minute. Merci. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, et bienvenue à la réunion du Conseil municipal pour le 22.
Welcome to the 22nd of June City Council meeting.
This meeting will be held in Andrew Hayden Hall by electronic participation in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended and the Procedure Bylaw 2021-24 as amended. For those who are able to, please rise for a moment of personal reflection. Thank you. Merci. Well, I'm happy to welcome Mr. Yves Brunet for the Mayor's City Builder Award and invite Mr. Brunet to come forward along with his City Councillor Ralston King to join us for the presentation. Mr. Brunet, welcome. Bienvenue. Welcome. And Ralston is your City Councillor. I'm very happy that you brought a cheering section with you today of family and friends who have joined us for this special occasion. This award recognizes people who have demonstrated an extraordinary commitment to making our city a better place through volunteerism or exemplary action. Yves Brunet personnifiait le service bénévole.
Yves Brunet has demonstrated an extraordinary commitment to make our city a better place. When
in 1986 at the age of 27, infectious disease was still considered a death sentence for many patients. His retirement from the public service at the age of 34 marked the beginning of a new and difficult chapter in his life, filled with uncertainty and medical hardships. It also marked the beginning of a rewarding mission that Yves embarked upon to educate and support community members. It
also marked the beginning of a rewarding mission that Yves embarked upon to educate and support community members.
Helping others with HIV/AIDS providing support and guidance for individuals who were struggling with coming out, living with AIDS, and the devastating fear of dying alone as a social pariah due to the stigma of the disease. Since 2000, he's given many educational testimonials about what it's like to live with AIDS, and he participated in lectures and training sessions with many organizations, including universities, colleges, secondary schools, and hospitals. Yves volunteers as a patient liaison at Briere, where he works on policy changes to improve the services to the clientele. He also works at the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Ottawa and provides his insight as a patient to help with their curriculum renewal process. In 2003, he began volunteering with Le Bras Outaouais, Bureau Régional d'Action SIDA, where his work included leading a support group for gay and HIV-positive men. For 6 years, he volunteered as a member of the board for the Canadian AIDS Treatment Information Exchange. Through his leadership and fundraising efforts over the last 5 years, Yves has been instrumental in bringing 11 LGBTQ plus refugees to Canada. Nice to see Lisa here as well, the organization. Yves has devoted his life to helping people in the LGBTQ plus community, people who are often marginalized, stigmatized, and ostracized, and truly in need of support and human kindness. His strength and compassion have helped people in many ways, and he is an inspiration for many in our community. Sa force et sa compassion aidant les gens de bien.
His strength and compassion have helped people in many ways, and is an inspiration for others in our community.
Yves outlived some of his HIV-positive friends. He saw stigma and ignorance slowly begin to shift over many years, and he witnessed a revolution in the treatment of the disease. He has touched the lives of many people in our community, and for his exceptional volunteerism and his many important contributions, it's my pleasure, along with your city councillor, Councillor King, to present you with the Mayor's City Builder Award. Félicitations. Merci beaucoup.
Wow. Things have changed. I'm being sandwiched by the first openly gay mayor of Ottawa and the first Black councillor in Ottawa. From my riding. And they are presenting to a French-speaking gay disabled person an award. I think we have made strides in diversity in the city of Ottawa. Just have to get my right magnifier if I want to see anything. I am deeply honored to receive this award. And as the mayor said, I contracted HIV 38 years ago at the time where people were dying right and left. And for some reason, I survived. And somehow it doesn't seem right for me to be sitting on the couch and watch television. So I decided to get involved, started with the people living with HIV and essentially giving a face. Nobody in Ottawa wanted to be known as having HIV. So we needed to break the stigma, and to do that, we have made significant progress. Today, I am deploying my limited energies to sponsoring LGBT refugees. And this is something that is very dear to my heart, because when I welcome refugees or newcomers to Canada, I tell them that they have come to a country where they can be almost anything that they want. But I counsel them that the very most important thing that they need to be is to be kind, to be tolerant of differences, of people that think differently from them, that look differently from them. I believe in kindness. I believe that when we are kind, we help the other, but also we feel better ourselves for being kind. And I hope that all of us here can keep that in mind in the actions that we do every day. COVID is difficult. It's difficult in Ottawa. It's presenting new challenges all the time. But there are a number of refugees. By the way, are they there? Okay. There are a number of refugees in the world that are waiting. Okay. Yeah, they are. So there are a number of refugees in the world, including these ones in Nairobi, that are waiting anxiously to be able to come to Canada or to Australia or different places. I've been working with them for 28 months. Let me tell you that COVID is relatively low on their list of things to worry about. We're dealing with typhoid, blood infection, food poisoning, extortion from the police. They get arrested for being LGBT, and the only way that they can not have a criminal record is either to pay money or to have sex with the officers. This is the kind of life that they have. And this is the kind of life that we can't even imagine except in the movies, but this is their reality. And we need to do something, and we can do something as Canadians to change that. Welcoming a stranger, welcoming a refugee to Canada is one of the purest form of kindness that we can do. And I bow to the resilience of these people over there who've been waiting for so long, some of them as long as 2014, and to the resilience of those that have made it to Canada that are sitting here with us today. I accept this honor, but only on the condition that I can share it with the many other volunteers that do this kind of work. And it's tireless work, and there are hundreds of them that do this, and I will share it with them. But most importantly, I will share it with my husband, Rob, without whom I would be lost. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Thank you.
Again, Yves, congratulations, félicitations. I now have the pleasure of presenting the second Mayor City Builder Award to Mandy Hambly, and I'm pleased to welcome Stittsville Councillor Glenn Gower to join us for the presentation. So, Mandy, welcome. Right. Helping others and making a difference in the community comes naturally for Mandy Hambly, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to share part of her story and recognize her many contributions. Mandy always found time to make Stittsville a better place, and she personifies the qualities of volunteerism and exemplary action that define a city builder. In addition to running a daycare and having a photography business, she has worked on many community projects over the years. A year ago, Mandy received the Stittsville Business of the Year Award, and she's been active in the revitalization of Stittsville Main Street, a point of civic pride for the community that is championed by Councillor Gower. She brought her skill and enthusiasm to the creation of a space for local young artists where they can showcase their talent with a community mural. Mandy is a strong advocate for people with celiac disease and created an off-gluten page on Facebook. Throughout her Facebook community and Instagram handle, she posts new products, meal ideas, restaurants, and bakeries that feature gluten-free food options. She's also been lobbying Tim Hortons Canada to acknowledge this common dietary restriction and offer a gluten-free food option, and her petition on change.org has nearly 8,000 signatures on it. Mandy also stepped up during the pandemic and offered free backyard workouts while implementing safety protocols that fostered an inviting, safe atmosphere for women. Perhaps not surprisingly, in addition to all her community engagement efforts, she can also add volunteer soccer coach to her repertoire as well. In 2018, Mandy launched an initiative to bring seniors and children together and a mutually beneficial relationship that brings smiles and laughter to everyone involved. She is a board-certified teacher, and finding new and creative ways to engage children in her care is a joyful exercise in innovative thinking. And for the past 2 summers, she used her photography skills for family photo shoots at Sultan Sanctuary Farm, with all proceeds going back to the special family-run farm and animal sanctuary. She has also been an advocate for the Bradley Craig Farm heritage property, Stittsville historic landmark with its nearly 150-year-old red dairy barn. And Mandy is currently VP of the Crossing Bridge Residents Association, and she's been involved with many community events over the years, including Blossom Fest, bike rodeos, Art in the Park, and the Canada Porch Virtual Contest 2020. Mandy is the organizer and inspiration behind Blossom Fest. I had the opportunity of visiting Blossom Fest just a few weeks ago with Glenn, which she started in 2019. With Mandy as director, the festival was back this year for the second annual event in May, which featured plenty of lawn games, sports, activities, and many more for the entire community. Through her actions during the pandemic and her many contributions, Mandy has demonstrated exemplary commitment to the well-being of her neighbors and community. She's the epitome of community engagement, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Mandy, very much for all you have done, especially for helping and inspiring others during a very difficult time. In recognition of your contributions to the community, it's my pleasure to present you with the Mayor City Builder Award on behalf of your councillor, Glenn Gower. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Mayor Watson. Congratulations on your soon-to-be retirement, and thank you for all you've done at the helm here in Ottawa for so many years. I just hope you don't move to Toronto when it's all over. Thank you, Glenn Gower, for the nomination. It was unexpected. Glenn Gower is the one who sort of brought me into community work in Stittsville, and he is doing great things in Stittsville, and I am very happy to call him friend as well as councillor of Ward 6. You can't get anything done without lots of other people helping you. And like Mr. Brunet, I have a smaller cheering crowd over here. There's my family, my husband. I have a husband, Rob, as well, and my kids, Lucy and Jack, and they're here cheering me on today. But in Stittsville, I have many, many friends who help out with my harebrained ideas and my zany ideas, and I call them my people. And I'm really glad that I finally found my people, because with their help, I'm able to get a lot done in Stittsville to make it a better place for the kids primarily, because our kids have missed out on so many things over the last few years. Pause. Although I'm super, super honored by this award, it feels really strange to be singled out for doing things that I want to do. Everything I do is just things I want to do. But I managed to pull more people in to help me out. And with them, I can get a lot done in Stittsville. But I think that everybody can get a lot done if they put their mind to it. All of us sitting here have passions, we have hobbies, we have skills. And if we just make the time to share that with other people, you'd be shocked at how many people can join your crew. And that's where you find your people. If there were free activities hosted in all of our beautiful parks around Stittsville, just put on by neighbors, we could do so much more in our community. And we can make our childhoods for our children so much more special, enriched by all the wonderful blessings that we already have here in Stittsville. My festival, Blossom Fest, was fully made up of things that people just donated, things people had in their basements and their garages. And that's something that doesn't take any talent or skill. That just takes a little bit of networking with people that live around you. I'm not going to stay up here much longer, but I do want to surprise my daughter. Her and I like to do poetry battles every now and then. So I hereby challenge Lucy Hambly to a poetry battle, and the subject is Stittsville. And I'll end with my entry. Just beyond the fringe, we've got coffee and donuts to binge. Welcome to Stittsville, O-Town's west-west, bordered by countryside. Hashtag blessed. Come walk our main street or ride our trail, a town born from its old train rail. Don't mess with our online moms, but do buy their seasonal bath bombs. Regular car thefts, noisy night drivers, nobody's perfect, but we're all survivors. We are not Stitz Vegas, even if McD says so, though we do host Parade of Lights, a really great show. Ward 6, you've won my heart. The new Stittsville, it's just the start.
Roll call, please, Madam Deputy Clerk.
Councillor Luloff.
Present.
Councillor Dudas.
Present.
Councillor Harder.
Here.
Councillor Curry.
Here.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Present.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Here.
Councillor Shirley.
Here.
Councillor Eglai.
Here.
Councillor Deans. Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Conseil Fleury.
Ici.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor McKenney.
Present.
Councillor Leeper.
Here.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Menard.
Here.
Conseiller Cloutier.
Is that?
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor DeRoos.
Here.
Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Councillor Meehan.
Here.
Councillor Hubley. Mayor Watson.
See.
Le quorum est atteint, Monsieur le Maire.
Merci. Confirmation of minutes, adoption de procès verbaux for the meeting of June 8th, 2022. Carried.
Carried.
Declaration of interest, including those originally arising from prior meetings. Déclaration de conflit d'intérêt. Councillor Deans.
Thank you. I, Councillor Diane Deans, declare a potential deemed pecuniary interest on the report from the Community and Social Services Department entitled Phase 1 Implementation of the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare System, as my daughter works for Children's Services in an area that may potentially be impacted by Council's decision on this matter.
Thank you. Any other conflicts? Communications is presented. Regrets, no regrets filed to date. Motion to introduce reports. Motion portant présentation de rapport. Councillor Leeper, seconded by Councillor Curry, please.
That the report from Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc. entitled Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc. 2021 Annual Report, Audit Committee Report 15, Community and Protective Services Committee Report 27, Joint Planning Committee and Community Protective Services Committee Report 3, Finance and Economic Development Committee Report 39, Planning Committee Report 63, Transit Commission Report 19, and the report from the City Clerk entitled Summary of Oral and Written Public Submissions for items subject to the Planning Act, explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of June 8th, 2022 be received and considered. That the rules and procedure be suspended to receive and consider Built Heritage Subcommittee Report 28 in order to allow the applicant to relocate the heritage building in good weather conditions.
Carried. Adopté. So we have two outside groups that have come forward to present their annual reports. The first is Marché d'Ottawa Markets Annual General Meeting of the members. So, Councillor Leeper, you have a motion to recess council for council to recess for the purpose of holding the annual meeting of shareholders by Marché d'Ottawa Markets, and that upon the conclusion of the annual meeting, the meeting of council will resume. Councillor Leeper.
The council recess for the purposes of holding the annual meeting of members of the Marché d'Ottawa Markets, and that upon conclusion of the annual meeting, the meeting of council resume.
Carried. Adopté. I'll now call on Brian Chandler, Board Chair, to call the annual general meeting of Marché d'Ottawa Markets to order.
Welcome to the annual general meeting of Marché of Ottawa Markets. I would like to call the annual general meeting to order and confirm that notice of this meeting having been properly delivered and a quorum of members being present, I declare this meeting to be properly constituted. If there are no objections, I would like to move to appoint Mayor Watson as chair of this meeting.
Carried. Update. We'll now deal with some administrative matters. First item, I'd like to move to pass the following resolutions. Be it resolved that Catherine Callery, having served as the maximum of 2 terms as director, has submitted a resignation effective today, and therefore the resignation of Catherine Callery is hereby accepted. Secondly, Marianne G. be re-elected as a director of the corporation for a further 3-year term. And number 3, that the number of directors of the corporation be reduced from 9 to 8. If I do not hear from you, you'll be deemed to have accepted the motion. Having not heard from any member, I declare the motion carried by the members. Second item, I'd like to move to pass the following resolution. Be it resolved that Welsh LLP be appointed as public accountant for the ensuing financial year, and that the directors be authorized to fix the remuneration to be paid to the public accountant. If I do not hear from you, you will be deemed to have accepted the motion. Having not heard from any members, I declare the motion carried by the members. Third item, I now ask Brian Chandler to present the annual report to the meeting. Brian, thank you for your good work and that of Zach and the whole team.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have a brief presentation. We thank you for your time. I'd also like to acknowledge a couple of our other board directors, Dave Donaldson and Catherine, who has recently resigned, with us here today. The agenda will quickly cover a brief message from me, a quick financial update. Zach will then review our mandate, and then we'll head into kind of what looks beyond. 5 years ago, when this organization was formed, we developed a strategic plan that went to 2022. Typically, we would then this year be introducing what comes next in the next strategic plan. We will not be doing that in early 2021. The City of Ottawa, once upon the completion of the public realm plan, has undergone a governance review for the area, and we are in the midst of that, and we anticipate that to come forward sometime in 2023. That is coinciding with some major changes and issues that we think that need to be addressed and resolved, or at least identified in terms of how this organization is run. We have learned a lot over the last 5 years about the market. It has grown a lot. We have been able to engage with the community in ways that I think were initially laid out and are very supportive of the initial mandate. But there are things that are changing, and I'd love to tell you that things are just normal operations, but unfortunately this year they will not be. One of the key things that we are really looking at is there's an REOI issued by the city for 70 Clarence, the future of that building and what the city does with the Byward Market. The public realm plan, which was approved 18 months ago, has not had any financial weight or support really put behind it. And as we know, some of the social issues in the neighborhood have continued to impact traffic throughout the area, as well as kind of wear down the asset that we really have there. And we will get into that a little bit more. The next slide on the financials. I think our group has done a tremendous job, as you can see from the income statement. There, on a cash basis, we have been break even. We have been able to kind of continue the operations, implement programming, engage with the community, and do all the things that we were hoping to be able to do within the context and financial constraints that we have. Zach has done a tremendous job in terms of finding grants to put on additional programming. Next slide, please. The balance sheet. We still maintain a strong cash position, which allows us to continue on. You'll see the depreciation of the tangible assets. One of the key things for both 55 Byward and for the outdoor market is we are ripe for some capital investment in both of those in both the building and in the outdoor market, the structures that were inherited from the city. And that is one of the key challenges that we face going forward. Now I will pass it over to Zach to talk more about how we have been executing upon our mandate.
Thanks, Brian. And next slide, please. So the mandate for Ottawa Markets, for those who aren't familiar, is to maximize the Byward and Parkdale markets' potential to be unique year-round places and destinations to purchase local produce and goods, as well as other service and products that meets the needs of local and citywide residents and tourists alike. 5 years ago, we set to work on this mandate and this mission with, the focus moving towards our 200th anniversary down there in Byward, but also with needed investments as we go towards the 100th plus for Parkdale, and looking to see what we can do to expedite the increase of vendors, visitors, but also at the end of the day, sales for those who participate. Next slide, please. So as part of that mandate, we have securing a diverse and innovative mixture of outdoor vending and indoor rental tenants. We also have the responsibility of positioning the markets as a desirable destination that offers programming and shopping opportunities for tourists alike. Both 55 and 70, 55 Byward and 70 Clarence, which are the assets that Brian mentioned, are doing well. We are at zero vacancy for both properties. We have begun to see businesses coming back online. Again, I think every councillor here has heard issues of staffing, of price increases. I think inflation today, we're seeing increases there as well, not to mention gas and other compounding factors. Nonetheless, businesses are still continuing to push forward. We're welcoming new businesses at 55 Byward, for example, Zups, which is a poutineery, but also Quebec grocery concept. And over the last year, we saw Afrotexture open, which supports makers from the Black community, as well as this past weekend, we saw the Assembly of Seven Generations open their commercial operation and had a wonderful celebration throughout the area. As well, a major component of our work over the last year was the repeal and replacement of the operating or the bylaw to our operating procedure, which allows us to be a little bit more flexible in that programming and ability to make decisions to implement the needs of both Byward and Parkdale from a vendor's, shopper, and experience perspective. We're also responsible for promoting local foods and goods, but also celebrating and continuing to build on the rich heritage of each marketplace. Over the last 5 years, we've seen our market program take a dip with COVID, but as we're coming out of that program, we're seeing 218 licensed vendors within our program. Of that, we have 48 farmers, 9 farmers from our BIPOC community grant, 3 farms overlap with that, as well as microprocessors, art and craft vendors, and an increased interest in street food. We've also limited our wholesaling program. It's a complaint or a concern you'll hear very regularly from shoppers, and we focus to only selling Canadian product on the market. In the past, you've seen a variety of different pieces and components to what wholesalers have. And then finally, with Parkdale and Lowertown, we've launched our community grants, which are $10,000 grants that we provide to the Lowertown Community Association, as well as the Hindenburg Economic Development Committee, which is a grouping of a few different folks that allows us to do programming around our buildings. Last year, you'll see a really great example of that in Byward with a mural we did with Mask on the William Street Plaza. And then we support the Friends of the Parkdale Park program. Next slide, please. And we'll go next slide. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead here. But finally, establishing a growth-based model is where I'm going to begin to transition this back to Brian to talk a little bit about what the future is. But I think it's important, not only for our vendors, for our business operation, to highlight some of the challenges that not only the agriculture sector is facing, but I think business in general. In Ontario, in particular, we're losing upwards of 300 acres of farmland a day. We are also slated to build a highway through our greenbelt. These are serious issues that impact farmers coming to market, impact the food that we've got. So as we move forward, we look to hopefully grow our program to help educate people about these important issues, but also start to shift to understanding topics like food security, but also the role and important role of markets as incubation spaces for that next generation of business leader and entrepreneur. So with that, I'd like to say that I think we're achieving our mandate. We're moving our program forward. We're seeing new vendors come in that have never vended before, and we're also seeing retirement. So we are in a bit of a transition there. But the future for us as we look to coordinate further with stakeholders in both Wellington West and in Byward, I'm pretty excited to see where we can go. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
Thank you. The City of Ottawa undertook, upon the completion of the public realm plan, a governance review of Byward Market, and we could not be more supportive of this initiative at this time. Through the past 18 months, after the completion of that plan, little investment specifically in that area and that plan has been completed, and we feel like this area doesn't really have a champion or a strong voice related to advocating issues specifically for this area. There are many stakeholder groups and users. They are all trying to raise issues, but it's not really done with a cohesive voice. And we strongly believe that expanding the governance of this OMC organization will allow that voice to kind of rise up and be able to work better with the city. We strongly feel we owe it to the residents, the city, the business core, to reinvest in this area, but we have yet to see a lot of financial support. One of the other main issues is the 70 clearance and the REOI. The estimated useful life of that garage is now coming within 2 to 3 years, and something does need to be done. The removal of that parking structure and those units underneath will remove 40% of our net revenue from our income statement and cause us significant financial challenges to be able to continue going forward. So we don't think that that can be ignored, and we need to come up with new ways to work with the city, to find ways for funding, and to find ways to kind of work within the community. As this organization changed, we feel like the role of this organization and its municipal significance also needs to evolve. We are not just a place to come buy produce. We need to be a place to help educate the citizens, help educate tourists, help people understand the 200-year history of this market, which is coming up very quickly, and be able to better program the public spaces and to have broader community engagement. Next slide, please. As this corporation grows, we need to invest in this area. We need to be able to find additional dollars to put into growing the outdoor market, fixing 55 Byward, and truly making this area a jewel that we all think that it is, or that it used to be. And with the expanded mandate and broader collaboration, that we can be better positioned to be a strong voice. We cannot continue to operate the same way going forward as we have the past 5 years, despite what we feel are the tremendous successes of fulfilling the mandate of this organization. Last slide. Thank you for your time. I will now turn it back to the mayor for any questions.
I'll switch back to French. This is the English channel. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, sound check. That's good?
Everything from, nobody likes to pay property tax. Property tax is important, but for the community benefit that we do, that is something that is a challenge and increases, obviously. To tenants, we have operating costs, which are quite high, and everybody knows that to be the case across the board, whether residential or commercial. As well, we have a significant expense in providing security services in the area to the public plazas on behalf of the city. Since we started in 2017, 2018, we've invested in close to $700,000 in private security measures in those spaces. So there's a real need to invest in an increased community policing presence in the area to help just with awareness, but also with education about the importance of being in each other's space. The second, probably largest challenge is keeping up with the maintenance of the area, and again, that sort of calls into question the costs. But that's sort of the beautification efforts. Those cost money, and those are things that we, to offset security, we may not be doing planting, right? And so those are decisions that we're finding we're at a position to make. I do also want to just, as I say that, thank the city and the city crews and teams. We actually do have a bi-weekly, monthly sort of check-in on cleaning services and where the market is at, and that's been going really well. And we've been able to identify sort of pressure points. So we're moving forward there well in partnership. And then I would say the third challenge really is something that everybody's experiencing in their household, and that's just inflation and sales. That is a big issue for businesses across the city, across the province, across Canada. And we need to start looking at measures to encourage people to come out, and the city is doing those things, whether it be through patios, but also finding the funding for free programming, free spaces for people to be. We've really adopted the idea of a public market for both Parkdale and Byward. We want to be a space for everybody, from the Royals to, just anybody coming to check it out. So really for us, we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the life cycle of the properties in the area through the public realm plan, that we're looking for strategies to offset some of those private security costs, and that we're finding the revenue to support programming and beautification. And I'll turn it over to Brian to add to that.
Just to add, I think that there's also a perception that the area is old and tired, and there's been a proliferation of social issues in the area. And I think that we really see ourselves as a part of the solution to that, and really working with those groups. And we're really trying to reintroduce, the area to citizens and drive more traffic to the area. And because of those issues, some people have been hesitant to come down. And people definitely don't interact with the space in terms of picking up their groceries in the same way. So it's really trying to reconnect with both the local residents and citizens throughout the city to come down and really kind of give it a new shot and understand what we're doing to make it a better place to be.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation this morning. I do want to acknowledge the Ottawa Markets partnership that we had last year in Raven Park, I believe last August, a very successful pop-up market. I believe, Mayor Watson, you came as well and had about 400 people from the community attend this, what I understand, first ever pop-up market. We're struggling to make this happen again this year. And so I'd like you just to describe what are the factors that you look for successful neighborhood pop-up markets, and what are the challenges that you're experiencing this year in particular?
Thank you. Great question, Councillor. So Ottawa, we have a wonderful, wonderful network of 23, 26 single-day markets across the city. They're all run by different volunteer groups. Ottawa Market is the municipal service corporation responsible for our historic markets. And so what we're seeing is people have a variety of options in their communities. Up in the Carlington area in Raven Park, you're in proximity to the Parkdale Market. As well, you have a small business there, the Carlington Coffee House, which is doing pop-up street markets where somebody is bulk buying produce and bringing them in. And so one of the challenges for us is this evolving business model for these sellers in understanding that their businesses too, and they need to make sales. And so for that farmer, we almost need to find sites that are guaranteeing significant sales in a 3, 4, 5 hour period. And unfortunately, that's not happening everywhere, given the changing in shopping behaviors, where a family that might not have said, gone to Costco is now all of a sudden thinking they might shift to Costco because, they're looking to save dollars. So that's been the biggest impediment over the last, I would say, the start of this season is in particular, people speaking with their wallets to these vendors. There's lots of people on the street talking and understanding the product, but converting to sales is sort of one of the major things that we look for. And as well for that farmer, they are in a lot of cases factoring in paying a staff member to be there, the gas to getting from the farm to the market, the setup time, the marketing that's required. Way back, before Instagram and social media marketing trends, people would seek out these types of interactions and markets. And now, as much of a space as they are to buy product, they are also a marketing space, and there is an element of theater to them. So what we're seeing across, I think, the city is, we've got really great markets. We need to do some more work on coordinating that network to make sure that sales are there for the farmers, but that we're also not oversaturating, the vendor to come on out, because ultimately, at the end of the day, as I said, their businesses too, and sales are the biggest thing that speaks to their interest. Thanks.
Thank you. And the final question is from Councillor Curry.
Just sort of a boring question. Thanks for this. You said at the very beginning, sounds to me like you're talking about a vision that you generally have, but you said at the very beginning you're doing a governance review and you've delayed your strategic plan. How does that all work together? I know the show must go on, but doesn't everything have to wait until you determine who's governing this?
So the governance review was an expansion of the current governance and folding in the BIA and some of the multiple stakeholders in the area. So we thought it was redundant from our organization with our specific mandate, which was a focus on the outdoor markets, to refresh our strategic plan, to move it forward, to say, knowing that we were going to add additional stakeholders to the governance aspect. So we put that on hold. The governance is still there. The mandate is still there. It's still business as usual. It's just the long term, and the mission, and we just need to expand the mandate a little bit to include the additional stakeholders that are going to be included with the revised governance plan. We've been talking with the city for the past 14 months and with the BIA and with other stakeholders in the area, kind of understanding what this will look like. So we have an idea of where we think we're going. We just need to really kind of hash it out and move it forward.
All right. Be interesting though, when you have a different governance structure, or, even if it's just slightly expanded, that things might change. But the second question is just generally, have you gone around to other markets in other big cities to see what they've done, and how much research have you done on that front?
We have a program where we send our market managers to different locations around the country and in the U.S. We have not gone abroad just yet. And as well, our market managers are participating in sector relevant activities such as the Intense Conference and again, the Ontario Fruit and Vegetable Conference. Most recently, going down to Jean Talon and in and around Toronto as well. Understanding what those look like, what the operations are, because there is a real difference between, and as you rightfully note, a 7-day-a-week mandate in operation in Parkdale and Byward versus a single-day pop-up market. And what we're seeing is a trend right now. We've seen it in areas in Preston. We're seeing it in Wellington West, where markets are being used to activate public space. And so they're taking on a bit of a different structure. So there's a couple of things that we're reviewing and looking to understand as we look to evolve, because we also really want to grow our market managers and our staff into positions of sector authorities and understanding what's going on with the ins and outs of the policy, from everything to from putting up a tent to making the decisions that are relevant to make those sales for those vendors and farmers.
Great. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Zach and Brian, for the good work you're doing. And to our retiring members, we send our sincere thanks. Next is Hydro Ottawa Holding Incorporation. Hydro Ottawa's 2021 annual report. There'll be a presentation by Jim Durrell, the board chair, and Bryce Conrad, president and CEO of Hydro. And I know there'll be many questions people have, of course, since the storm, and we welcome Jim and Bryce and their teams from Hydro Ottawa, and we thank them for the great work under very, very challenging circumstances that you were faced with just a few weeks ago. So we'll get Jim and Bryce settled in, and the floor is yours, Jim Durrell. Just push the button there. Just push the gray button.
Been a while since I've been here. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. I have with me today someone who's well known to you, obviously, our president, Bryce Conrad. We also have with us Guillaume Paradis, who is responsible for all the distribution of our hydro, and Julie Lupinacci, who is in charge of communications for hydro.
Can you speak a little closer to the mic, Jim? It's
sure.
hard. There we go.
Is that better? Today, I'm going to discuss three things. One, the annual report, and I'll just on a highlight basis, I'm going to take it as read by members of council. Two, talk about some of the highlights of our strategic plan, which is approved by our board in the fall of last year, but is really important as we move hydro forward. And the third is obviously the storm, which each one of you were involved in some way, some shape, some form, some more than others. In terms of our annual report, it was obviously a great year last year. I'm not going to spend a lot of time patting ourselves on the shoulder or anything else. It was witnessed in the dividend that you received for $23.7 million. And I think what was equally important to our board at the time was it's called SAIDI and SAFTI, but it's basically the frequency and the duration of outages that take place at hydro. And for the fifth year in a row, we were best in class in terms of all similar hydros. So the men and women who were out in the field and who worked at this, quite frankly, were doing a tremendous job. And it also reaffirmed the investments that we had made in infrastructure. I can tell you next year, it's not likely to get the same size of dividend for the obvious reasons of the storm. But we were very grateful. And during the storm, the Premier phoned Bryce every single day and has reaffirmed that he's going to pick up the costs. So that will be a tremendous benefit to hydro and to the taxpayers and all of the people who use it. Secondly, our strategic plan. And there are 8 parts to it. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on the 8 parts, but probably the foundation of our strategic plan is the desire to achieve net zero by 2030. And this would make us the very first municipally owned a hydro facility to ever achieve these goals in Canada. And I think that's very formidable. And I think it's something that when we do our strategic plans, we try and do them in line with what the city thinks is important and what the city priorities. We can't work outside of you. We can't work inside of you, but we can work as much as we can alongside of you. And we've tried to do this in our strategic plan. And we know this commitment to the city to achieving net zero operations down the road. And we believe that we can achieve this in the next 8 years. Right now, we're probably at about 80%, 75 to 80%, but it'll be the singular focus of our senior management. Another, I think, key important direction was becoming a partner of first choice for significant green energy and carbon reduction in our community. And that's been witnessed by our involvement with ZB, which I think this entire city should be proud of because it'll be the first, I guess you call it carbon neutral community in Canada, if I'm not mistaken, which is really something. And there's not enough read about it or written about it to really acknowledge that. And it resulted in us having to do some pretty advanced things in terms of thermal energy and using some old lumber works in Quebec to transform this. We're working again, leveraging and promoting our distributed sources. We're doing as many solar roofs as we can. We're working with the airport to make it net zero. We have an advanced program underway with the Ottawa Hospital that still has to be approved. But in that program, we will go a long way to the greening of a hospital as much as possible. The other points I think that you've all read, and you can see up here when I talked about working with the city, Here are four major things that we're still working with the city on it, and it's important. You own us 100%. We should be the energy provider for the city when the city does things internally. ROPEC is a very good example, and the conversion up and the cogeneration upgrade. We're working with you to assist in the electrification of buses. Many city-owned facilities, as you know, are older facilities and have to be retrofitted. And we can do this in a very cost-effective way for you as council and for particularly the taxpayers. And last but not least was our very effective and financially rewarding street lighting transition to LED, which was a huge benefit to the city. Those are the highlights, I'll say, of our strategic plan. You have it in your file there, and if you have questions, Bryce and I would be very happy to deal with it. So let's deal with the elephant in the room. It's hard to believe, but it's a month and 1 day ago that the storm took place, and in some respects, it seems like a lifetime ago in this era of constant 24/7 news. But you've all seen the stats, and I'm not going to belabor them about the scope and the size of this particular storm was unprecedented in the history of Hydro Ottawa and in our own city. And while you could look at the incredible devastation that was created by the tornado and by the ice storm, they paled in comparison to what happened to the city on the day of the storm. And I guess what I would equate it to two things, and obviously was asked, as you were, many of you were asked 100 times a day by your constituents, depending on the number of outages. The electrical circuit, the circuit that runs hydro, if you could try and imagine it as a gigantic extension cord that goes around the city. And then off that cord, every couple of meters would be spliced, and in would come another cord, and off that cord would be spliced, and they would get down to the neighborhoods. A similar analogy would be your transportation system. We have our very major arterials that take the vast majority of our traffic through the city. We then have our second major arterials on the internal roads. And then eventually on the third level, we move into community neighborhoods, and I live in a quiet cul-de-sac, and every year they say, how come we're the last to get our snow plowed? And I said, because you live in a quiet cul-de-sac. And if you want to have your road plowed first, move to a busy road. Well, we don't want that, sir. Then fine, thank you, have a nice life. And when you equate transportation to the electrical storm, our first priorities, much as when you have a gigantic snowstorm and you have to get your major roads done first, were the critical infrastructure. Our hospitals and our airport were all critical to us, and our water treatment plants. And they were the very first things that had to be dealt with initially by hydro. And when your power's out, I was out for 6.5 days, and lots of people, when it's out, you don't frankly give a damn about anybody else's hydro being out. You're worried about yours, your freezer, all of the things that we all know happen. And from our perspective, we have to do the right thing. And so the very first thing was critical infrastructure. The next thing is we would put power on where we could have the greatest benefit to the community. So if we could fix one particular area and it would power up 3,000 homes or 300 homes, we're going to do that before we go in and power up another area that's going to do 10 or 15 homes. And so as you prioritize these steps going down, it's the rational, proper process for restoring hydro. But again, in a normal year, we would put maybe 400 poles in. We lost 400 poles in a matter of 24 hours. It was like an entire year's work. It takes about 6 hours to properly install a pole. We'll just try and fathom that. And again, when I looked at it all and at the work that the men and women of Hydro did, I applauded them. There were a number of questions that were asked by you at City Council, by the public at large, and I would just like to deal with a few of them. and the most obvious was, do we have the necessary resources to handle a storm like this? So I said to Bryce, you never build the church for Easter Sunday because it's going to sit empty a long time in between at a very expensive cost. Well, at Hydro, we have enough resources. You go back in the history of Hydro and all the way along, that's why we are the best in class in SAIDI and SAFTI, in frequency and duration. And a storm like this, we're very fortunate. And the Hydro communities, if I can call that, including Hydro One, are a close-knit group. And when there's a storm, a major happening, we send crews to the States. The crews send states up here. The US sends, you know what I'm trying to say. Hydro One was tremendous. Toronto was great helping us. And this storm just didn't hit Ottawa. So there were other resources that had to be used. But we had over 600 people working. The system, frankly, couldn't handle any more people doing what it was doing. And so in response to the resources, and again, there isn't anybody that wouldn't be sympathetic to a family whose freezer is going and the cost of food today, et cetera. But that's as fast as the system could go. You have unique neighborhoods like Alta Vista, where the poles go down the backyards. But when you're trying to change a pole in a backyard, you can't get through to those yards. You have to go in over the top of the house with a big crane, and it takes a hell of a lot longer than 6 hours to change it, I assure you. So the city is very diverse, as we know in many areas. And we've really looked hard, Guillaume, Bryce, myself, the board, at the amount of resources, and we had no issue. Why did it take so long to restore power? Just for the reason I said, when you have 1,500 breaks in that huge, big extension cord going around the city, and then all of those other cords coming out of that, and you have 1,500 splices, trust me, and they're not all in easy to get to areas, and it takes a long time to do something. Why do we have wooden poles? Good question. Largely, they're very cost effective. Main reason. They last up to 50 years under normal circumstances. That's not bad. Longer than most of you will be in city council. And, you know, when you look at that, we've put composite poles in certain places, and we're still looking to see, but I can tell you in the storm, we lost a number of composite poles as well. So wooden poles are not the problem. A storm of that magnitude will always be a problem. Why don't we bury our lines, which we heard a number of times? And as you know, in key areas, I'll use Elgin Street as the simplest example. When there's major infrastructure work done, we bury the lines at the same time. Burying lines is enormously expensive, and if in new neighborhoods, of course, it's built into the cost of the homes and the development, et cetera. For us to go and bury the lines here in Ottawa and around the city would take approximately 90 years and would cost about $10 billion and would never be approved by the Ontario Energy Board in any event. But the cost would make the cost of hydro to all of the people who phone you all the time and are upset exorbitant and beyond just wouldn't make hydro reasonable. And if that storm showed us anything, it's just how important our electrical system is at a reasonable cost to the public. This one I found alarming, but it came out, and was the process of restoration affected in any way by income, race, gender, et cetera. And I know Bryce I was, we were insulted by that. It's nothing could be further from the truth. And as I said to you at the start, when the process of restoration commenced, it's critical infrastructure. Secondly, where do we get the biggest bang for our buck so that every line that we fix that's spliced puts the most people into place? And then the third is like snow plowing in your cul-de-sacs. You're going to be last, and has got nothing to do with race, gender, or anything else. Our maps, which was a legitimate concern, and we acknowledge that, and our communication, which under normal circumstances, I think every single member of City Council would acknowledge that the communication from Bryce, from Julie and her department is exceptional. When you have a small outage or you have an outage in your community under a normal circumstance, you hear about it instantly and you have instant communication with Hydro so you can get to your public. When you've got an entire city down, it can't possibly happen. And we received criticism and it was justifiable in the sense that if you were in an area and you were accustomed going in and finding it and you couldn't, and your power's out, you're not a very happy camper. And we understand that. Bryce, talk a bit about the restoration and the maps and the communication.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Again, in a normal situation, the maps work well. They've been working well since the storm. We had events yesterday. The storm, the maps work well. In an event like this, where the entire system has effectively been clipped, you just get one cascading failure over another, which just precludes that map from working well. Where we would put it up, people would call in and complain that they were out of power and it didn't show on the map. And again, it creates more work. It created more angst for the customers. So we effectively took it down. And I made the decision, again, from a communications perspective, the last thing I ever wanted to do was to sort of make a commitment to have power restored by 3 o'clock and not miss that and not hit that deadline. So if you go back to the time of the storm, I was consistent in all the media briefings of saying we were working tirelessly on the bulk system. Once we had the bulk system up in place, we would be in a position to provide better data to you as councillors and to our citizens. That is what happened. It took us a day longer than we otherwise hoped to get the bulk system up, but it was up on Saturday. We were able to provide you as councillors, affected councillors, with circuit level data Saturday and Sunday, and we were able to restore our outage map on Sunday or Monday with estimated times of restoration. All people wanted to know, and I know you know this, was they wanted to know when their power was going to come back up. So again, when the map went up on Monday, we saw a complete turn in the way the communications was happening, and it was to the benefit. In terms of restoration, again, I won't repeat what the chair said, but we learn lessons. Every one of these events is a lesson, is an opportunity to learn lessons. And following the tornadoes in 2018, we took a look at our system and said, okay, we need to do something, harden our stations, because the station, as you recall, at Maryville was the real touch point for us. So we worked to harden the stations. We also we strengthened the lines. We did a climate change assessment study. We strengthened our lines so that they could withstand ice loading and 130 kilometer-hour winds. Previously, it was 110 kilometers and ice loading. I can tell you today, if we increase it to 150 kilometers in ice loading, it still is not going to stand up to 190 kilometer-hour wind touching down and ripping through. So, again, to the chair's point, there's only so much that we can do that's affordable. Empathy. We are entirely sympathetic to the outage and the length it took, but effectively we rebuilt half the grid in the better part of 8 days, and I think that's a credit to the men and women at Hydro Ottawa who worked tirelessly around the clock.
And I think to just wrap this up, and then if there are questions, we're happy to answer them. The board has asked Bryce, and there will be a full report done because it is a learning experience. I hope we never have one of these bloody things happen to us again, but it's a learning experience for all of us, for the men and women who are out in the front line, for those of us behind the scenes. And what has impressed me always about our company is the willingness to adapt to the situations of the time. And I can assure you that there is absolutely zero defensiveness anywhere in our organization as to how we handle things. We are constantly striving, which is why we were best in class for 5 consecutive years, to be a better organization. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, members of council.
Great. Thank you both very much. I know we'll have a number of colleagues who have questions. So if we could ask colleagues, because there's at least 11 people have their hand up. So if you could be brief in both the questions and the answers. Councillor King.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'd like to thank Mr. Durrell and Mr. Conrad for their presentation today, as well as for the incredible efforts exercised by Hydro. both management and the staff on the ground to not just restore, but in effect rebuild the grid after the May long weekend storm. As you have noted, grid resiliency is obviously a top concern since we're increasingly seeing more stress on the grid, whether it's from stronger storms, more rainfall, or more extended heat waves. And we know that climate change is making extreme weather more common, and you've been talking about some of the initiatives that you've been taking, and obviously more damaging. And this obviously puts more pressure on older aspects of the grid that are operating beyond the assumptions than which they were built. So my first question is, can you briefly speak to the investments that Hydro Ottawa is making to address grid resilience?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor King. So our capital plan is approved by the Ontario Energy Board. It's a 5-year capital plan. We're roughly spending about $130 million a year on capital. We are investing heavily. When you see the wooden poles, you kind of think back to the good old days, but quite frankly, those wooden poles also hold an inordinate amount of sensors and some pretty high-tech equipment. So our go-forward plan is to sort of not only harden from a storm perspective, but also to use, increase the telecommunications capacity, increase the sensors, so that, for the most part, when you have an outage today, I'm trying to think of one recently, but there, I think Councillor Gower had one in his ward. Effectively, I don't need to roll a truck at that point in time. Our system office can throw a switch and repower that circuit. That's what we want to be able to do throughout the entire city. Now, obviously, if a tree falls down and takes out a line, I need to roll a truck. But for the most part, that's where our investments are, in that sort of that ilk, if you will, the sensor speed, the smart grid aspects, if you want.
I appreciate that. And obviously, I think that we need to have more investments in smart modernization and smart grid modernization, because we obviously need to build grid resilience. And we can really pursue that through the implementation of different types of approaches, including microgrids, as you know, small scale networks within the larger grid, as well as grid hardening. Ensuring that we are really working to ensure that our power poles withstand higher winds. And you've said you've been working on that, and the hydro utility has been working on that, as well as different types of technologies, which you've also mentioned. So after this event, can you speak to where we'll be investing, whether we'll be investing in microgrids or more grid hardening operations to really attempt to address the challenges that we're seeing from climate change?
Yeah, without getting into the inside baseball of how our distribution system works, because it's complicated at best. But look, the future is going to be in distributed energy resources, where you're localizing community-based energy in the communities closest to close proximity. The days of the large nuclear reactors and the long runs from Pickering and Darlington down to us, those are sort of ebbing and flowing, if you will. So that's part of our investments. We need to start to accentuate those, encourage those. And as the chair said in his report, that's part of our strategic direction. The second element is just in terms of storm hardening. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. So let's take the 2018 tornadoes and what it did to Maryville Road. Let's take this to Recco and see what it did to Maryville Road. Well, the poles toppled. So maybe there's an opportunity for us not to bury all the lines going north-south, but those north-south lines are clearly bearing some unique circumstances. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to bury one of those north-south lines to give us that backup and that sort of contiguous planning for future events of this sort, so that, Barrhaven doesn't get completely severed every time Greenbank or Woodruff goes down. So we can maybe route the power through Maryville. What I will say in this instance, which a lesson learned, which was a positive, and I think I was telling Councillor Kavanaugh this at one point in time, I have some of the most intelligent, creative, smart engineers imaginable. And they were doing things with the power grid that I'd never seen before and we'd never seen before. So we were shoveling power from Canada and Stittsville down into Councillor Kavanaugh's ward. It doesn't work that way. It shouldn't work that way. But they found a way to do it because that's the duress that they were under, and the stress that they're under at the time led to that creativity. So all of these are, I say, lessons learned. We've learned new ways to manage our grid. So,
and I have one last question, Your Worship. You said that you were speaking to the Premier on a regular basis, and that there was assurance that there would be investments to recoup the money that was spent around this storm. I was wondering if you had any further discussions about funding from senior levels of government that would assist Hydro Ottawa in toughening up the infrastructure, because obviously we're going to see more storms like this, and we'll need more investments in smart grid infrastructure. And it might not all be able to come from the ratepayer. So I'm just curious, are there the potential for investments from senior orders of government to really address this challenge, which is a key component, in my estimation, of the climate crisis, really?
Yeah. So again, great question, Councillor. I would tell you the same thing I told everybody else. I spoke to the Premier more often than I spoke to my wife during that 2-week period. So he was gracious in his concern for us, and wanted to make sure that my crews understood how valuable they were. So I have nothing but respect for that. With respect to your question in terms of senior levels of government, I would only suggest to you that, if Hydro Ottawa steps in line for funding, say from Infrastructure Canada, for climate change hardening or climate hardening or some other source, some other pot of cash that the federal government has, we will effectively be competing with you. We will compete with our shareholder for that funding, right? And I don't think that's a position you really want us to be in, but maybe it is. If it is, we can prioritize as such. But we have a way of securing funds for capital. It's a rate application that we do before the Ontario Energy Board every 5 years. We have been hardening our infrastructure, as I said, since before 2018, but since the tornadoes, for sure, it's become a priority. It will continue to be a priority. Trust me, the trauma of this event, as much as it impacted everybody, our company is still wearing it. So it will be front and center in our planning going forward.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the candor of that answer, and I once again appreciate the work that Hydro Ottawa undertook. There are varied neighborhoods within Rideau Rockcliffe, some more affluent than others. They were all equally affected because of the heavy tree canopy throughout all of those neighborhoods. So I understand the argument you're redressing in terms of some of the comments that you've received. But I just want to say, on behalf of my residents, thank you for the tremendous amount of work that was undertaken during that storm. There are lessons to be learned, but you've brought them forward to us, and we definitely will be following up with Hydro in terms of crisis communication as well as smart grid modernization. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Durrell, for your opening comments. You covered off what basically the questions that I kept getting asked over and over again. And one of the big ones was burying lines. And this is in older neighborhoods. People saw that as the solution. And I appreciate that you're giving a price tag for it. But I also appreciate the okay, there's a noise in the room.
Some oil for that, I think.
I also appreciate the fact that you're mentioning about where it would be worthwhile in terms of major grids, and that's very helpful. A couple of questions in terms of older neighborhoods. One of the biggest affected one was Glaber Park, a very large neighborhood, and the odd thing about it was that their power went out on Sunday morning rather than Saturday. And that was something that bothered them, and it created a lot of rumors, and I can't substantiate anything that, why that happened, why it was delayed, and, they felt that they were picked on or something. That that there was a delay. Can we get answers to why that happened? Why there was a delay in their outage? And of course, people want information, and information is useful rather than trying to come to their own conclusions.
Councillor, without that specific park here, we have Guillaume Parody, who is responsible for all the distribution. And this is not to push the question off, but I would like you to ask Guillaume in an email, and you will get a specific response, which I think you deserve and the people in that area deserve. And then when if there's subsequent questions, we'll be happy to answer them. But it's a challenge here at times, having then talked about the big circular electrical cord and all the splicing as to why one area. Guillaume would be able to tell you that and specifically deal with that area.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the contact that Julie kept us in. And I want to thank her for answering our calls at all different times over weekends or whatever, back and forth. And yeah, we were talking to each other more than anybody else in my life. So I appreciate it. What people did see as one of the causes was trees, and that concerned me a lot. And I wanted to know, in terms of percentage of the damage, what was caused by trees. That concerns us as a city. We want to keep our canopy. These are older, big trees. They lose a branch, they knock out lines. And we want to balance so that we can keep our big trees, but also keep our power. So how is that being handled?
It's a very fair question. And we had over 1,500 trees come down. And I don't think anybody was absolved from losing a beautiful tree in their neighborhood. And we have a regular, as you know, tree cutting service where we trim the branches, often at the people get upset when we go in and trim the branches on their beautiful trees to try and bring them back. But it's an absolutely essential part of preservation of the grid. But the devastation was great, and your concern about the canopy is a very legitimate one. And I don't know, Bryce, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, nothing. I just suggest that, obviously the tree trimming cycle, the vegetation management will be a part of our analysis going forward. Most trees in the city are trimmed on a 3-year cycle. Is 3 years insufficient? Do we need to accelerate that? I mean, the winds were so dramatic in this instance that it wasn't branches falling on lines. It was trees being flipped up in the air and landing on lines, which again is not, I can cut a branch, but I'm not going to, that tree canopy is too important. I've seen advice. I received an email once saying we should cut all trees within 30 meters of a power line. And I was cautiously going to forward on to Councillor McKenney because she always gets on me about the vegetation management side. But the point is, if you trim the trees back from 30 meters from a power line, we wouldn't have much of a canopy.
Thank you very much. Now, this was an extraordinary situation, but probably what I heard the most was that if you knew power was going to be out for a longer period of time, could you have let people know so that they could make plans if they knew it was going to be 8 days or more in many cases? That was probably the thing that I heard also the most. And I realize this has been extraordinary.
I think it's a fair statement. Sometimes, and when you've got other issues, Bryce came out at the very start and said, when this happened, that it was aspirational that we might have all the power back by a week Friday. And that was from the very get-go, because one of the things he and I talked obviously every day several times is not to create false hopes. That's the worst thing you can do for somebody. You're going to be out a week. Face it, that's what's happening. You're going to be out a week. And when we initially looked at the system and the grid, he was very comfortable feeling that by Friday, and we use that messaging all the time. And you're right. We talked about the progress of attitudes during the first few days of the storm was almost, in some respects, while it was very serious, people where it's like going on a camping trip and the power went out. Everybody was helping everybody, doing stuff. There was, in a very perverse way, a buzz around the city. And then after day 3 and 4, it was more, okay, that was enough fun, get my bloody power back on and quickly. And after 5 and 6, where people legitimately were concerned, some of it got downright nasty and offensive and unwarranted. But I will say, in Bryce's defense and in our communications department defense, Councillor, they did a heck of a good job at telling people how long it would be. I don't know if everybody always listened. Now, there are specific areas that you mentioned earlier that you will get an answer to that I think are fair. But throughout the entire process, each one of you had direct access to Bryce. And I know he spent much of his time trying to solve as many of the problems for each of you as he could. And you can't do much more than that. You know, really, they had daily briefings, and I followed them like all of you did with interest. And we never gilded the lily in any way. We said it's going to be probably Friday, and it was a little longer just because of the severity and the number of splices in that electrical cord took place.
Yeah, if I could just build on that, Councillor, the commitment I made was to Friday was to restore the bulk system, and we actually were successful in restoring that system on the Saturday, so we were a day late. And by bulk system, what I meant was, and what I defined as the bulk system was, to Jim's point about the extension cord. The extension cord, all the cords were, power was flowing to all of the cords. That didn't mean power was flowing to every house. Categorically, that was never the commitment. The commitment was, we'll get that up. Once I had that up, we would be in a better position to provide realistic timelines for restoration. We would be then into the backyards and houses, moving trees, doing all that sort of stuff. So that really was the commitment. Again, you know, hindsight being 2020, should I have said Saturday? Should I have said Tuesday? Possibly. But at the time when we did the initial damage assessment, you'll recall I said there were 200 and some poles down. End of the day, there are 400 and some poles down. So our original damage assessment was off by a factor of 100%, to give you a sense of just how bad it got.
Thank you very much. I know my colleagues have many questions. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. A quick comment first. I want to thank Bryce and the team. I know, Bryce, we had a few conversations, and I appreciate you allowing me to vent a little bit during those conversations on behalf of my residents. And my colleague just mentioned it, but Julie's hiding behind the pillar there. But just an amazing job. Available any time of the day, any day of the week, on big or small problems. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that publicly. So I want to talk a little bit about communications. We've already talked about that a little bit already, but the sense I got from my residents, and as you know, Pine Glen, Maryville Gardens, Country Place, you know, significant damage after the storm. And the message I got from them was, it was lack of ability to plan. If they had a better sense, and I hear you're saying that you didn't want to promise something that you couldn't deliver, but what it did, the silence at times led them to believe it was imminent that power would come back on. So they didn't make arrangements to book a hotel or go to the cottage or go live with grandma and grandpa for a few days. So, and I know there was a lot of plates spinning in the air at the time. So the only question I have with regard to communications is Chair, you've indicated that there's going to be a review, and just would like a public commitment that part of that review will be communications, lessons learned, what could be done differently, what could be done better in the future. And, you know, if we can get that commitment, I think that'll go a long way. Because, you know, as we're talking here, I see my phone and the weather network saying we have another storm coming this afternoon. So these are going to keep coming, and we have to be able to get that information out. So I see nodding of heads. So I assume that will be a portion of the review.
Will be, Councillor, and When the review is done and finally approved by the board, Bryce will be sharing the highlights with all members of the council. So this is not going away. We're not. The one thing that I can assure you, and Bryce is in 100% support, is that nothing is going to be swept under any carpet anywhere. And so you will get the responses, hopefully, that you want. And if there's something in the report that you're not satisfied with, as always, you've had a direct line to our president.
No, and I do appreciate that. The other very quick question I have is, I'm tabling a motion later today as part of council, seconded by the mayor, around finding ways to encourage private property owners, apartment buildings, old age homes, to have working generators, to have working backup generators. I'm wondering if either of you can comment on whether hydro can assist in some way in that, whether it's messaging or education, and your general feeling about how that would have made this experience different if more apartment buildings, more seniors' homes had generators in place and working.
Well, I think the most popular person in Ottawa is a Generac salesman right now. Yeah, and embrace, but just because it's a good question.
Yeah, so we actually have batteries that we deployed early on in the crisis. In fact, we had I think we had 45 batteries that we were deploying. I think we assigned them to the paramedics actually to help them with their life-saving accident. We use those batteries for planned outages, so that if we know we're fixing a street or something, then we offer the residents of that street a battery so that they can keep doing work or school at home. Obviously, I could have probably used 160,000 of those batteries at the height of the storm. I will speak as I was shocked, gobsmacked, whatever the word you want to use, that you can have a 300 or 400 person residence that doesn't have emergency backup power. I find that shocking. I find that almost borderline criminal. These seniors can't get up and down. It's just, I found that shocking. And the fact that there were some buildings where the water couldn't get up, again, I found that shocking. So I applaud the city for moving forward with the motion. I think it's long overdue. In terms of generators and backup assets, look, most modern commercial buildings have backup generators for just this purpose. Our building was running on a generator for a period of time at the start of this thing. That's what people need to do, particularly if you have a senior residence or some other thing. So yeah, we would support it entirely. If there's anything we can do to help, obviously we will do so.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hambly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to add my voice and the appreciation of my residents for Hydro and their great work that they did do through such a challenging time. I think it's important to mention, I think both Mr. Durrell and Bryce touched on this, that it was not the work of a few. It was a work of many that came into town. We had hydro companies come from, I think, as far away as New Brunswick and Manitoba to come in to help. I know I personally witnessed the Ministry of Natural Resources people that came in to help, and they had the biggest chainsaws I've ever seen. And there was a lot of people out just videoing what they were doing. But I think they were there the following Sunday helping with the cleanup, and at least in my area. And it was really something to see. But I think we should also give kudos today to city staff through the city manager for the work that was done by city staff as part of that cleanup to help with the hydro folks to clean the brush away and the fallen trees. And just, we had firefighters in Canada going down the street helping people. I know my colleague, Councillor Gower, had firefighters working around his neighborhood as well, just helping out. And, it was just the city guys in the pickup truck stopping and getting out and helping people on the street. That really makes you proud to be part of the city of Ottawa. So, I know Alain over there, Alain Ganche, we talked lots through that storm as well. And so, kudos to the staff that did that.
On the communications challenges that you faced, one recommendation that I'd like to see come in the report is on that Saturday night when the storm hit, the local radio stations were broadcasting pre-recorded programming, which is something they've been doing now for a few years, where in the past we could rely on CFRA, for example, to go during the ice storm and the tornado, they were able to help us communicate to people because there was no point in putting out a newsletter. Nobody had internet or had power to read that newsletter. What they needed was something that they could access without power. On that Saturday night, I know the mayor and I were very involved with talking with Bill Carroll at CFRA about getting him to go on air. And he had to do it from his home. And luckily he had a backup generator. And I think they were able to stay on the air till about 11 o'clock that night before they could set up the next day to actually broadcast. I'd like to have this as part of the lessons learned and the recommendations going forward, that we actually treat local radio stations as partners in this and find a way to communicate quickly with them about what we're doing. Like, for example, that Saturday night, I think we had one of the first shelters open with the Canada Leisure Center. Thank you to city staff for that. It would be great to be able to communicate that out to people. And so that kind of thing, if we could, that would be the one recommendation I'd put in there. The other thing I'll close with, Mr. Mayor, because I want to be as brief as possible here. I really think we have to look at getting a superhero cape there for Bryce, because Jim is right. He talked to us all the time. Like, the messaging early on wasn't what we wanted to hear, but your prediction that, this is going to be the end of the week before we make a lot of progress here, you were right on, and it set the expectations, and that was certainly what you were telling me was what I told my residents, and the majority of them understood that and they prepared for it. So I just, can't say enough good things about you there, buddy. You did an awesome job once again for us. And so thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the chance to express that.
Right. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kitts, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know we're supposed to be quick, so I won't go on and on in my thank yous, but I do have to say, your team was available day and night to answer my questions, give updates, and that allowed me to manage expectations when needed. So a very sincere thank you to your entire team, the administrative team, and especially those on the ground for all of your efforts. When it comes to prioritization based on density, how many clients you can get online in the shortest amount of time, I fully appreciate that. Mr. Durrell, your cul-de-sac, I've shared that with residents myself. I hear you. But I do think a consideration needs to be made for those on septic and wells, because no power in that scenario means no water. And without a generator, you risk flooding your basement with the septic. So as part of your review, is this something you're considering that for residents with those unique challenges, is the prioritization, is that something you're considering?
I think it's both the president and the chairman of the board are on well and septic, so we're very sympathetic to that comment. No, I think it's a valid statement, and we will look at it. I can't say what our action will be, but I think it's a valid comment. Okay, thank you for that. And then my other question, I know there are still a lot of trees in the city that are in precarious positions. So is your team proactively going out to evaluate the right of ways? Should there be another weather event? I'm concerned that there could be trees that could come down very easily online. So just how are you managing that effort?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, Councillor. And I was hoping to leave today with that final message, which is the grid is still relatively unstable. And by grid, I mean not necessarily Hydro Ottawa's grid, also the Hydro One transmission lines in. You saw a fairly large scale outage last Saturday in against Councillor Eglei's ward. We lost 15,000 customers. It had nothing to do with us. It was the loss of supply from the provincial grid. So trees took down some more. So the short answer is yes, we're out there proactively doing that work. I think we probably got most of the stuff that was hanging over around near trees and branches, but every time there is a good wind gust or good windstorm, there will be more trees and branches. Some of them are already weakened. They'll just come down. And again, you saw that again last weekend. So the short answer is that's okay. That's what we're there for. And we're fully staffed to be able to deal with those situations in relatively short order. Some cases, we don't have to roll a truck. Sometimes we can just kind of flip a switch and redirect the power from another source. So, but yeah, it's going to be a few weeks of some heavy winds before we get all that out of our system.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Councillor Menard, please.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and I'll try to be short as well. First of all, thank you to the crews and their work, as well as the support that came in to Ottawa from city crews from across the country. Bryce, your team and office for the discussions daily, that was very helpful as well. So just want to say a huge thank you for that. I just want to touch on three things from your presentation. The first is just the basic communication with residents, and I have some suggestions and just see your response on the emergency alert system. So when the city has a parking ban, it's not quite an emergency alert, but parking ban in the winter, an email goes out, right? And anyone that's subscribed can get that email. So I'm wondering if that is an option, if that already exists. And the other suggestion is just communication about preparation for residents. My neighbor was running our fridge from, his car battery and an inverter, and just something I didn't know existed, but saved us on our fridge side. So just those two things on basic communication, and I'll go into two other quick issues.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. If there was, I believe everyone that has a cell phone would have probably gotten the severe weather alerts that were coming in that day. So I'm not sure whether the parking ban system would have added anything, but obviously if there, as part of this debrief, this lessons learned, if there is an opportunity to sort of dovetail our messaging in with that, we're happy to do so. With respect to your second question, look, I run the utility. I've run the utility for 10 years. I couldn't pick up an inverter. I wouldn't know which side of an inverter to plug something into. So I'm not sure I would necessarily be the one you want to ask as to how to do that sort of stuff. But what I will say is emergency preparations, and we saw this again in the tornado. The average residents of Ottawa are not prepared for a prolonged emergency situation, whether, I know the number is 72 hours. I'd suggest most of them aren't ready for 72 hours. So anything that we can do to encourage and foster the behavior of being prepared and better prepared is I think, money well spent. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And on the email system, I just sort of mean, daily updates, or if there's a particular area that's out, an email could go out to that area that just says, look, here's the current situation. And that might help us in the future. I think hopefully simple enough to set up. The city has some good examples. So I'll just leave that with you. On the burial of hydro wires, obviously no one is suggesting we go out and rip up all the infrastructure across the city at great cost. I agree with you there. But I think the suggestion is what our new official plan is calling for and targeting. And that's the burial of wires on streets that are being redone, particularly traditional main streets. And it makes sense for a few reasons. The development opportunity, because we lose potential as a result of the setbacks from the wires, the resiliency of the infrastructure, and the space it can create on the street. So now obviously there's a cost to this. But when we're opening up the street anyway and taking down the poles, does it not make sense in many situations, given what we've experienced, not to put back up the new hydro poles with overhead wires in some of those situations?
Again, Councillor, it was a great question, and we're always happy to come to the table and be part of the solution. So if you look at Elgin Street as a good example, you look at Councillor Fleury did down along Montreal Road, another example where we were able to sort of make the justification to bury those lines. I'm not opposed to burying the lines. I just can't afford to bury the lines, and the city has a policy with respect to burying the lines and how that cost gets apportioned. So if there's a willingness and an ability to sort of review that, and, particularly in light of some of the larger streets, and, the main streets, as you said, then again, we'd be happy to be part of that solution. But it is significantly more expensive. It does also incur costs for the people and the companies and the businesses along those lines, because you're now burying their infrastructure, their electrical infrastructure to match our burial. So it's not as simple as sort of cutting open the street and dropping lines. So I guess I'm trying to get across, but you know, we're part of the solution, and we will be.
Certainly, and really appreciate that. Lines are being buried on Greenfield, Hawthorne, and Main Street with the renewal there, and you know, appreciate this is an evolution for Ottawa, but appreciate the answer. Just on the last one, building retrofits. Mr. Durrell, thank you so much. You mentioned this, and I really appreciate it in your presentation, separate to the storm we just had, but there is a payback to the city when we do those deep retrofits to our buildings. And I know Hydro Ottawa has made the offer. They want to be part of the solution. I've been working diligently on my end with city staff internally. And I know good conversations with Bryce to try to move in this direction with the city as soon as possible, because we get a payback there. It makes sense financially for us to do it. And of course, it reduces our emissions. So appreciated you raising that. The offer is still on the table. And I hope that very soon and next term of council, we can take you up on that offer and get that done. So thank you very much, Mr. Durrell.
Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to all of you. Without naming you, but I want to specific Julie for all her good communication with us. Some of you might know West Carleton March has both Hydro One and Hydro Ottawa, and we were grateful for both companies. I have to ask different question on page 51 of your financial report, and it talks about the business plan, and they enable the company to project 255 million in net income over the next 5 years. I know this report was obviously offered before the storm. So with the storm now took place, is those projection number is still going to be able to be achieved?
We just had our audit committee meeting before our last board meeting. And of course, we were reviewing, as all audit committees do, the first quarter results, which frankly aren't worth a damn after what happened in the second quarter. And so Bryce and our financial department are putting together, they've estimated the original costs, as I said, to be somewhere in the $25 to $30 million range, and possibly more. But depending on what the province does, it will have an impact on us. There's no question. There's no ifs, ands, or buts that it's going to affect our bottom line. To what degree, we still don't know. And it's first and foremost, trust me, on the audit committee's mind and on Bryce's mind and the board's mind. So it's a very good question that we have no answer for at this moment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Deans.
Thank you, and thank you both for being here today. I just want to quickly add my thanks and praise for the work that you did, recognizing the enormity of the challenge you faced. I think you did an amazing job, and I think the community really do appreciate that. I agree with my colleagues that talked about communications, and we can always improve that, and I think it's worth looking at. I also was going to raise the same issue about how we prioritize restoration of power in such a large scale event, but what occurs to me, and I just heard from my colleague Councillor Brockington, is we were sort of just a couple of lines back from the front line and heard a lot from our community. So maybe when you're doing the review, it would be worth just asking members of council if there is any area in particular that they would like to see you focus in on, just so, because we're all giving you our ideas today. So maybe it would just be useful if we sent them to you, if you would take that as a direction. I have a couple questions. One is around, we're getting a healthy dividend this year. We appreciate that. But what was the impact on us financially in terms of next year's dividend? And when I was reading the annual report, it talked about all of the things that can impact the dividend. One of them was insurance. And I wonder what the impact of this storm is on our ability to get insurance in the future, and if that in turn impacts the projected dividend for next year.
Yeah, great question, Councillor. So yeah, we were fortunate. 2021 was a relative.
Bryce, can you just speak a little louder?
Sure. Yeah, sorry. These plexiglass things are a bit disturbing. 2021 was a good year for us financially. You got a $23.7 million dividend, which is again a record to the city. Next year, the floor that we've committed to is $20 million. In the absence of some direct financial assistance coming to us from the province in terms of repayment or providing the relief that's been sort of talked about, the dividend will be $20 million. Unless there's some sort of magic that comes through. So I'm just managing expectations. This was a $30 million storm, comes right out of our bottom line. So you would be wise to project 20 million for next year. Again, unless the province comes forward with some money.
Wow. Okay.
And with respect to the insurance side, utilities we're not allowed to sort of set aside. We have insurance on our facilities. We have insurance on our people. We have insurance on our buildings. We don't insure our poles and wires. That is effectively what we get rate based for. So there is no, as much as you'd like to sort of set aside some money for a rainy day to fix the poles and wires, that's not the way it works. So, our relief comes via the next rate application.
Okay. Okay. That's good clarity, because when I read the report, it kind of gave me the impression that the wires were insured too. But.
Yeah, our generating assets we can insure, obviously, and have insured. And as you can appreciate, insurance is not cheap any longer. So, but your other question about reaching out to you, specific ideas, we're happy to do so as part of this lessons learned. You were on the front lines, often dealing with the hostility that we were dealing with, but front and center. So we're happy to reach out and have those conversations with you directly and with the various community associations. We've learned that the community associations have been an invaluable source of input into our storm restoration efforts as well.
Great, thank you. And just one final question. It's on a completely different topic, but since you're here on more than just the storm, you are recommending the addition of 2 new board members. And, I understand that you looked at what others are doing and making that recommendation. And I don't have a big problem with that. I just wonder about the erosion of the percentage of input at that table from the major shareholder, which is City Council. And so I just wonder I know you're looking for specific expertise, but as I understand it, there are actually, if you would add 4 positions available. So what's the rationale for diminishing the percentage of council representation on the board?
I think that's a very valid question, Councillor. When we initially started to look at this, we recognized that, first of all, Hydro Ottawa is no longer a small company. It's a very large company. Secondly, as what originally I can recall when I was first started as your chairman, we really were in largely the distribution business. We just took the energy from Ontario and redistributed it. And as I think I've mentioned in previous annual general meetings, we're now in excess of 30% of our revenue is coming from non-regulated sources, and that's only going to increase. And we felt that the board being expanded at this point in time would put the organization in a better position to adapt to all the changes that are taking place, quite frankly. You need a specific number of CAs or CPAs, and because of your audit requirements. You want men and women who have business merger experience because we continue to acquire companies. And you want obviously some legal training in there somewhere. I don't think in any way it diminishes the impact of the city in terms of you own us. You can tell us what to do. If you decided to pass a motion today to fire me, I'm gone. Okay.
Oh, I know all about that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's right. So, the city's position, and, we've had some excellent representation over the years, and Councillor Curry and Councillor Harder are no exception. And so I'm very comfortable, and I would hope particularly, And this has evolved. And again, he's getting too many plaudits, and thank goodness we've already renegotiated his salary. But he does an outstanding job of communicating with you. And that to me is first and foremost, and not when there are problems areas, but to tell you on a monthly basis what your company is doing as a shareholder. And you don't get just an annual report. You get, I think, a very comprehensive and informative report from Bryce and our team. And so that's the rationale. We were very comfortable with it, the board and senior management, just because of the growth of hydro and the diversification. And frankly, we don't see it in any way, shape, or form diminishing the impact of city council, because in the end, you own us.
And the other point, councillors, city obviously appoints all the directors. All these directors go through the city. So.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Duda.
I don't think it can be said enough, so I am going to repeat what my colleagues have said. Is I have so much gratitude, as does residents, for the work done by your crews, your staff, and all those who are on the front lines helping us get through this. I don't think anybody questions the impact of this storm and the unique aspects that Hydro Ottawa had to deal with and contend with throughout this. So I think that can't be said enough. I'm not going to go on long. I am going to speak to the communications aspect, as many of my colleagues have as well, because I think that one of another unique aspect of this was the prolonged nature of the outages for many residents. One of the other aspects of that is, although there was almost daily media updates and information shared on social media and news releases, a lot of the residents that I was serving, they had lost power. They weren't able to charge their devices. They stopped after a period of time getting information. And my concern was, and this is maybe my own personal experience, councillors and city staff and public health were on the front lines trying to get these residents information about hydro. And I'm not in a position to give that information, not only because I wasn't receiving it, but also I do not have the expertise, nor did I have the insight. So that meant that we're then putting more pressure on you and your staff at a time when you're supposed to be focusing on getting the system back up as a whole. So what I would say is I'm very happy to hear that you're going to be doing a debriefing and a lessons learned, but what I would ask that you do as a very innovative company that's on the front line of cutting edge technology, take into account that over a prolonged period of time without power, people will not have access to many technologies. And it shouldn't be councillors and it shouldn't be city resources that are on the front line providing the information to your customers as they're trying to get through an outage. So I know that this was a very unique circumstance, but I would like to see the pendulum swing from city resources, including council, being the providers of information on behalf of hydro, to hydro finding innovative ways, and maybe it could go back to some more traditional in-person ways of giving information to your customers, because you have the best information, you have the best expertise.
I think,
I
think it's a very valid point. And back to the confusion and the problems that you face when you think about it. And Councillor Hambly mentioned it. There was no internet halfway in half the city. And so you had that, a traditional way of getting information out to our citizens was taken away from us. I thought the suggestion of working with the radio stations, I hadn't even thought of that, frankly, very valid and a very good point. And it'll be a part of our subsequent review. So your point is very well taken.
Well, and for myself, I think that there's many opportunities for the City of Ottawa going forward to have a stronger relationship and collaborative approach to working with yourself, Hydro. But my concern is, once again, is it should not be city resources on the forefront of providing information we don't have. I would also say too that, you spoke about providing council with information and the update from the lessons learned. What is your plan of updating your customers with what you have learned through this experience, so that they also understand what is going to be approved upon if this comes to pass in the future or for future emergencies.
Yeah, it's a great question, Councillor. We will find ways of communicating with our customers, whether that be via the newsletters, whether that be via the inserts that we put into the bills, whether that be community association meetings or town halls. We will find ways of communicating the results to them and soliciting their input as well. So again, I think the community, I appreciate the role that all city councilors played during the storm. They were incredibly helpful, and we will, it wasn't that we wanted to put you on the front lines. It was, that's the position you ended up finding yourselves in. And we will, find every opportunity we can to communicate better with you and with the city council and with our residents.
Thank you. Thank you for the update. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Gower, please.
Thank you. Bryce, last week I got a text from you. There were thousands of people who lost power on Thursday evening in Stittsville, and you said that it was a loss of supply from Hydro One's grid. Can you give some more context? I think there was another large outage on Saturday, same issue. Is this still storm related, or is there something else going on with these loss of supply?
That's a great question. Both of those instances were still storm related, much like, so in both instances, I think you lost 7,500. I think there was 7,500 in your area. I think Councillor Eglai had 15,000 out in the PN, kind of that area. Both of them were loss of supply from the provincial grid. So it's Hydro One either taking their system down to sort of remove trees and clear stuff, or a tree taking their system back down again. So, but to be very, very clear, I'm not pinning the blame on Hydro One. We today, I believe we're in River Ward today, taking down 3 poles that we found were damaged from the storm. So that's call it the hangover from the storm, but that's the system's going to work its way through for the next couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. And I'll echo my colleagues in thanking the entire Hydro Ottawa team. I think there's a lot of residents who would like to have a way to say thank you, and perhaps a Hydro Worker Appreciation Day sometime later this year would be a good idea to allow residents that chance to say thanks in a public way. So maybe we can chat about that later, council colleagues and mayor's office, and see what we can do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brockington, I believe, is our last speaker.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation of the 2021 annual report and the storm that we experienced last month. I am a Hydro Ottawa customer, and I was without power for over 9 days. So it was quite the experience, longer than I think any member of council. I want to acknowledge that I will never truly fully understand or appreciate what you went through as far as the organization and all the work that you had to coordinate to get us back powered, and the Herculean tasks that were associated with that. I do want to acknowledge that and thank you. And of course, the linesmen and women who were in the field getting us back connected, both Ottawa based and across our province and other provinces. You have a document that is identified as the post-mortem, and you do have identified a number of issues, which I appreciate coming out of that storm. You've heard questions today about how will councillors be engaged? We have a lot to say. And in a response to Councillor Eglai, you said a report will be produced and shared with us. But further to Councillor Dean's point, how can we be engaged in this process? How will you proactively reach out to us to ask questions, to engage? I have a lot to share with you. There hasn't been any communication in this regard coming out of the storm. So can you just elaborate further for me on this matter?
Well, I think to start with, Councillor, there's a constant communication from either yourself or other members of council with Bryce and or our staff. And we probably have 15 to 20 questions that have been asked that we have aside that have been asked by members of council of our staff as this thing unfolded. As the storm unfolded and communications continued to work. And so I'm somewhat, I don't see the necessity of having a special conflab with members of council to discuss this. I think each of you are strong communicators in your own right. And if there's something in specific you would like to have us look at, and that has been mentioned here by many of you today, we're more than happy. There's not 1 ounce, as I said, of defensiveness in this process. We view it as something that we did exceedingly well and can do even better the next time. Hopefully there's not a next time. So I guess that we hadn't looked at how do we specifically involve members of council more than we already have.
Okay, during the derecho in particular, the challenge for me, receiving up to 1,000 inquiries a day by email, Twitter, phone from my residents, was the lack of information and communication from Hydro Ottawa. It was me compiling where the streets and sub-neighborhoods were without power, providing lists multiple times a day to my contact, and pushing Hydro for information. I would not say that was proactive on Hydro Ottawa's part. And maybe you didn't know, maybe you just didn't have that information. But the frustrating part is so many of your customers needed information and they weren't getting it from Hydro Ottawa. The sources were city councillors who were in the field 14, 16 hours a day, some of us without power in our own homes, to try and share that information. So communications, from my perspective, were not exceptional or outstanding. There's significant issues here during the storm, and I have a lot to share with you. So I will accept your offer to reach out and share that in more detail, but there were some very significant challenges. Even once you got established and understood the full extent of the problem, about sharing information that we could then in turn share with our residents. Second, I'll just say that there have been communication issues well before the storm started. And I have a list here, which I will share with you offline. And the issue again is communications, proactive communications, and when there are issues, how we can address that issue in a quick way. And there's one example I'll give is the replacement of hydro poles on Merivale Road in Carlington, which resulted in 2 poles on a sidewalk panel. And the old pole wasn't going to come out for up to 9 months later. So you have people in Carlington can't using the sidewalk in a wheelchair or pushing a pram because you now have 2 hydro poles on that sidewalk, and no one at Hydro saying this is a priority for us. We'll get there, councillor, 6 to 9 months. And thankfully the city got engaged and we could get that further. But it's those types of challenges, that's one of many, well before the storm started, where we can work better together. We need to work better together, and communications has been and was an issue during the storm. And that's why I raise it today. My residents are concerned about the fragility of the system. They're concerned about, as Mr. Conrad noted, how to be better prepared, the 72-hour kit, those sort of things. There are other issues that my residents are concerned about. But when we boil down to it, we're not judged how well we communicate in good times. It's when we have a bad incident like a storm and people can't get basic information. That's what we heard loud and clear and needs to be addressed and improved going forward. But thank you for listening.
Well, and if I can, there's been many storms and many outages in your area and other areas outside of this particular once in a lifetime storm. And I would say that I've never heard anybody complain about that communication under normal circumstances. And if I've had any feedback ever from members of council, it was basically that you were all very satisfied with the level of communication you got under a normal circumstance. In this one, all the cards were off the table. We agree that it could be better, and we will strive to make it as good as we possibly can. And we recognize that each one of you, who's that has Pine Glen? Councillor Eagle-Eye? Can't even see you. There you go. Yeah. Is that, yeah.
Keith has Pine Glen.
Yeah, I mean, Pine Glen was just a complete disaster. I used to live on Palanca Drive. It was a complete disaster. There were other areas of the city, there was nothing going on. And, you know, so those of you that were in the middle of the complete disasters, you have, not that it's worth anything, but you have 100% of our sympathy. And I walked many miles in your shoes in days gone by, and I know exactly what it was like. And so I can only tell you and assure you that we will do everything in our power. Will it be perfect, our new system? Guarantee you not. Will there be room for continued improvement? Guaranteed yes. Your comments are valid. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you both very much. A thorough discussion on a very challenging time in our city's history, and we appreciate all of the long hours that your employees put in. In many instances, they were their own homes didn't have power, and they were leaving their families to go and help other families. So we very much appreciate the frankness of your answers and the thoroughness, and we appreciate on behalf of the citizens of Ottawa the work that was done. Frustrating for some people the longer it took, but the reality was that it was, you know, when Bryce first said this was worse than the ice storm, I said to myself, that's not true. The ice storm was pretty horrific. But when he explained, I think you lost 50 poles in the ice storm and you had to replace 400 poles with this storm, it was significantly worse. And we appreciate the information you shared with us. So thank you. So we have a revised motion by Councillor Harder and seconded by Councillor Curry. Councillor Harder, do you have the motion?
Yes, I do, Mayor. So on June 17th, the city's council draft agenda was released, and with it, the Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc. 2021 annual report. And in that report on page 22 in document 4, errors were identified, and a revised report was then issued to members of council and published with the final agenda. This motion to therefore be it resolved that council receive and consider the revised report with the revised document floor reflecting the correct names in terms of the current members of boards of directors.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor Curry. On the technical amendment, carried.
Carried.
On the report as presented, recommendations 1 to 6.
Carried.
Thank you, and carried as amended. We'll go through the consent agenda. Audit report number 15, rapport numéro 15 du comité de la vérification, cybersecurity investigation report. Carried. Committee recommendation, consolidated financial statements. Carried.
Carried.
Next, audit review and investigation reports. That committee recommendation that council consider and approve the recommendation. Carried.
Carried.
Item 15, Community and Protective Services Report number 27, Phase 1 implementation of the Canada-wide early learning and child care system. Councillor Deans is removing herself as she has a conflict on this item. So on item 15.1, the recommendations carried.
Carried.
Item 16, Joint Planning Committee and Community and Protective Services Committee Report number 3. Item 16.1, Review of Tools to Prohibit or Prevent Rent Evictions. Carried.
Carried.
16.2, Inclusionary Zoning Status Update and Direction, compte rendu de situation et orientation de zonage d'inclusion. Carried.
Dissent.
Yeah. Carried.
Dissent by Councillor Lulon.
Dissent.
Item 17.
Dissent as well.
And Councillor Shirelli.
Andarouz.
And DeRuse. FEDCO, report number 39, rapport numéro 39, Comité des finances et de développement économique, 17.1, anti-racism strategy.
Mr. Mayor, I was wondering if you'd allow me to make a comment on this item.
Yeah, we'll come back to that, Ed. Item 17.2, 2022 tax and rate operating and capital budget Q1 status report.
I have Mr. Mayor, it's Councillor Meehan. I have a question on this one.
Is it a short one, or should we come back to it, Councillor?
Come back to it. Thank you.
Item 17.3, 2021, placement de 2021 fonds de dotation et autres activités de la Trésorerie. Carrie?
Carried.
Item 17.4, le plan d'accessibilité municipale de la ville d'Ottawa, PAMVO, compte rendu 2022. Carried?
Carried.
Item 18.1, affordable housing capital strategy and update. Councillor Fleury and McKenney have a motion, so we'll come back to that. Item 18.2, official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, 70 Richmond Road and 376 Island Park Drive. Carried?
Carried.
Sent by Councillor Leeper. Item 19, Transit Commission Report number 19, rapport numéro 19 de la Commission de Transport en Commun, delegation of authority contracts awarded for the period January 1st, 2021, December 31st, 2021 for Transit Commission. Received?
Received.
Item 20, Built Heritage Subcommittee Report number 28, rapport numéro 28 de sous-comité de patrimoine bâti, rising from the Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting of June 20th, 2022. Item 20.1, application to alter 70 Nicholas Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario, or Part 4 rather, of the Ontario Heritage Act. Carried?
Carried.
Bulk consent agenda. Does anyone wish to have anything removed from the bulk consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I have, is it 21.2? Is that, did we already deal with that, or is that in, I believe that it's not in the bulk agenda.
21.2 FEDCO.
Yeah.
In the bulk, sorry, which one was it that
It was the one-time funding for the climate change master plan.
Okay.
20, sorry.
It's 21.2.2.
Yes.
Yes. Did you want to dissent on one of those?
I just have a question, if possible. Quick question.
Okay, we'll come back to that then.
Okay.
Anyone else on bulk consent?
Yes, Mayor.
All right. Who was that?
Sorry, Mayor. It's Councillor Menard. There's 3 items I'll dissent on: 21.2.5, 21.2.6, and 21.2.7. It's the brownfield items. Thank you.
Okay. So we also have item 21.3.4, zoning bylaw amendment 126 York and 151 George Street lifted for a technical amendment. Who has that technical amendment? Councillor Gower, do you want to read it, Councillor, so we can just have that on the record?
Yes. So for item 21.3.4, whereas the proposed text of document 2 of the report recommends replacing schedules 74 and 76 of the zoning bylaw, and whereas the schedules above affect properties other than the subject site, and whereas the intention of the report can still be accomplished through exempting the subject site of the provisions of the schedules, therefore be it resolved that with respect to document 2, details of recommended zoning in the report, the following be approved. 1, item 2 be replaced with the following: amend part 17 schedules by adding new schedule YYY as shown in document 3. 2, add subsections 5 and 6 under item 3B as follows. 5, schedules 74 and 76 do not apply. 6, height maximums are as shown in schedule YYY.
Okay, and that's seconded by
Councillor Fleury.
Councillor Fleury. So on the technical amendment, Carrie. On the bulk consent, except for the item Councillor Meehan has held, carried.
Carried.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll just go back to items that have been held. Item 17.1 of FEDCO anti-racism strategy, Councillor King, and as I had an opportunity at FEDCO, we had a great presentation by your colleagues, and I want to thank you again for your leadership. From day one, you grabbed onto this file and you haven't let go, and you've made a lot of good progress. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for that, Your Worship, and thank you for this indulgence. as council liaison for anti-racism and ethnocultural relations initiatives, I'm pleased that we have the city's first anti-racism strategy before us for approval. After 3 years of hard work and consultation with over 1,000 residents during a pandemic, we have a comprehensive 5-year plan which is designed to proactively identify and remove systemic barriers in city policies, programs, and services in order to realize a vision of racial equity. The strategy provides 28 recommendations and 132 actions to address racial inequity in governance, housing, economic development, health, child and youth development, as well as ensure racial equity in the workplace and institutional practices. The strategy aims to create programs and services that meet the diverse needs of Ottawa and to grow an equitable and inclusive workforce. I'm pleased a wide range of organizations have been inspired by this work. In anticipation of this strategy and with the development of an anti-racism secretariat, many groups and agencies have been highly engaged. These organizations serve a diverse range of communities, including Indigenous, African, Caribbean, Black, Asian, Jewish, Muslim, newcomers and immigrants, youth, 2SLGBTQIA+, women, and gender diverse persons, people living with disabilities, francophones, and older adults. I'm profoundly grateful for the contributions of so many organizations and so many residents, too numerous to fully name, who shared their lived experiences, their advice, and suggestions that formed the foundation of the strategy. Just some of the organizations that contributed included the Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership, Ottawa Carleton Immigrant Services Organization, the Ottawa Chinese Community Service Center, the Ottawa Muslim Women's Organization, Independent Jewish Voices, the Ottawa Black Mental Health Coalition, as well as the Somerset West, Centertown, and Pinecrest Queensway Community Health Centers. I'd also like to thank them and the many others who provided input. I'd also like to especially thank those individuals who served on the anti-racism advisory table who informed the strategy. During these 3 years, I believe the development of the strategy created hope and encouragement in diverse communities, which directly resulted in resilience, innovation, and community action. We've seen through the creation, through this process, the creation of the city's first African, Caribbean, and Black Wellness and Resource Center, as well as the development of a strategy to create safe, accessible, and culturally appropriate mental health programs and services for a myriad of communities, as well as the Dream Legacy Foundation's pursuit of housing initiatives in an effort to build community security and stability. I really want to thank the community for taking on all of these challenges during the development of the strategy. I'd also want to say thank you to the mayor and to my fellow council colleagues for supporting this initiative, and who I know are always reaching out on a regular, ongoing basis to the diverse communities that make up our city. I also want to thank Councillor Kavanaugh as council liaison on women and gender equity, who always advocates for extending equity in all city policies, and Deputy Mayor Dudas for advocating for broadening equity in the city's social procurement policy. Most of all, I'd like to acknowledge the tireless efforts of our staff on this policy, including Donna Gray, Suzanne Obiera, and the rest of the community and social services team. It's a great pleasure to see this emerge. I think many community members are elated that we are moving forward, and I believe that this is real change. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Very well said. Thank you very much, Councillor King. On the committee recommendations, 1 and 2, carried. Adopté. Merci. The next item that was held was item 18.1 of Planning Committee Report number 63, 2022 Affordable Housing Capital Strategy and Update. And Councillor Fleury has a motion, signed by Councillor McKenny.
Wonder if it's possible to put it on the screen. I want to thank Mr. Willis and Mr. Saya for working with myself and Councillor McKinney on this matter here, and Charmaine Forgy as well. Whereas report ACS 2022 CS Gen 011 provides a status update on all the funded projects to date, as well as to seek approval from council on the priorities and processes for capital funds in the 2022 budget. And whereas the report seeks to provide delegated authority to the Director of Housing Services to prepare and submit an investment plan to the federal and provincial governments in the event additional funding is provided. And whereas staff are to support the development of publicly owned lands around LRT stations, and on April 10th, 2019, council received report named here that identified a total of 20 sites for affordable housing development opportunities involving public lands. Whereas ACS 2019 report separated the parcel into short-term, medium-term, and long-term opportunities. Therefore, be it resolved that staff in planning real estate and economic development, 1, retain external architectural resources to prepare an analysis of the potential development yield. Example, how many units could be built for affordable housing on city-owned land sites near stage 1 and stage 2 LRT stations previously approved by council as targeted sites for affordable housing projects over 2022-23 using existing departmental budgets. 2, if federal agencies are willing to collaborate and share in the cost of the exercise, conduct a similar analysis of federally owned sites near stage 1 and stage 2 LRT station previously approved by council as targeted sites for affordable housing projects. 3, upon council's approval of the upcoming analysis of city-owned lands near stage 3 LRT stations, conduct a similar analysis in future years with the departments, including the required budget resources and future budget requests, and all other major transit stations identified in the new official plan as staff and budget resources are available. And 4, commence an interdepartmental analysis of the potential of using air rights over the viable LRT stations for affordable housing projects subject to addressing the operational requirements of OC Transpo, constructability, asset management considerations, with the timeline to report back developed in consultations with the applicable general managers.
Thank you. And staff, Mr. Willis, you're comfortable with this motion?
Yes, Mayor, we are.
I would just, maybe it's a friendly amendment, Councillor Fleury, to add in on item 2, federally and provincially owned sites, because the province has land in Ottawa as well. So on the motion, carried, adopted. The next item held from the bulk consent agenda is Councillor Meehan had a question with respect to 21.2.2 capital adjustment and closing of project city tax and rate supported.
Yes.
Councillor Meehan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this has to do with the tax and rate operating and capital budget section. I just have a question. It has to do with the wording at 4.9 million of funding received from long-term care investments to increase direct care time to be applied to the 2022 compensation budget as outlined by the Minister of Long-Term Care. I'm curious about the wording of this. Where do we know, like, where is this money going to be directed? Is it to the compensation, or is it going to be to staffing levels?
Councillor, I'll start, and my colleague Donna may pipe in as well. The city was very fortunate in terms of receiving permanent funding to increase the compensation and staffing levels at long-term care. The reason for the recommendation is to add that to the budget for 2022 and create that base going forward. Donna can speak to the application of it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So how we work the compensation budget or the hours of care is hours of care are applied to residents. And then we take those hours of care and apply it to the staff to ensure that we have the staff hours to deliver the services to residents so that those hours of care are increased. And that actually results in the compensation costs on the compensation budget. So it is direct service to residents provided by direct care PSWs and RNs for direct care.
And do we know how many more people we can hire because of this investment?
Yes, so that is actually translated into, I don't have the exact number, I can provide that to you, but that is provided into direct FTEs and hours. We would actually calculate it into hours because it would be also an increase of our casual staff that would be increase the hours that they would have available to them. So I could provide that to detail to you.
And this would be money directed to the 4 municipally owned long-term care facilities, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. The reason I'm just asking about where this money is going to go, and hopefully that it was going to be going to increasing staff levels, is because sadly what we learned during the height of the pandemic, that a lot of the staffing levels basically dropped off in many of our homes. Luckily not here specifically in Ottawa, but I'm hearing from residents in my ward concerns that staffing levels, not in our long-term care homes, but many of the retirement residents, has not increased since many of the homes lost staff due to the COVID, the pandemic. And this is concerning me right now. So it's very difficult to go into a retirement home and ask about staffing levels. It's something that we just can't access that information very well, but it is a concern of mine. So I was wondering if I could make a direction to staff at this point. Would that be okay?
Well, what would the direction be, Councillor?
If I'd like to just read it now. I'd like to have the Dr. Etches at Ottawa Public Health, along with the Director of Long-Term Care, to determine what issues, if any, are there in terms of COVID response, isolation frequencies, when lockdowns are required now, overall staffing levels, changes in full-time and part-time staff, an assessment of feeding routines, preparedness for power outages, air conditioning.
Mr. Mayor, point of order.
Point of order.
Just as Chair of Public Health, I just wanted to confirm for everyone that Council cannot actually direct Dr. Etches or Ottawa Public Health or the board to do something. They can request,
Okay.
but there can be a
inquire.
direction from Council to either Dr. Etches or the board.
Well, I can certainly alter this to make it a request. I have my apologies for that. I think that it would be incumbent on Ottawa Public Health to take a look at some of the conditions in our retirement homes, not just our long-term care. We have to look after our most vulnerable, and we have to ask questions and determine the issues if we're going to address them. So whatever the terminology is for my request, then I will certainly do it. I can submit it later if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Meehan had also asked for item 17.2 to be held as well.
Yeah, 17.2. I'm just wondering if we can find out exactly how the $1 million in one-term funding for climate change master plan, do we know where that money is going to be spent or how?
Mayor, if I may, we do have a spending plan for the additional $1 million, and just recall that the direction for the additional $1 million came out of a budget direction, coming out of the Standing Committee on Environment, et cetera. In December, we were to find additional money. 2/3 of it will be towards energy evolution initiatives, and I'll list them in a minute. 1/3 will be spent to accelerate the climate resiliency plan that was before the committee this week, and Council expressed a lot of interest in speeding up that work. So that's 1/3 of it. Of the 2/3, projects include review of the fleet electrification, plant bath modifications to support district energy, renewable gas feasibility and business plan for ROPEC, solar installations, a deep retrofit of a community center, and electrical upgrades for the Green Fleet program.
So are we hiring additional staff then?
The additional staff are to support the acceleration that councillors asked for this week on the climate resiliency study. The rest are all actual capital projects.
So the $1 million will go to staffing then?
Mayor, just to repeat, 1/3, the two positions that are dealing with climate resiliency, approximately 1/3 of the $1 million are about speeding up the climate resiliency plan. The rest, the 2/3 of that 650,000 are for capital project support.
Okay. Capital project support.
They're money into capital spending, Mayor, if I could be a little clearer.
That would be great. Okay, got it now. Okay, thank you very much.
Great. So on item 17.2 carried, and on item 21.22 in the bulk consent carried.
Carried.
Item 22, disposition of items approved by committees under delegated authority suite à donner des articles qualifiés par les comités en vertu de pouvoir délégué. Received. Item 23, motion to adopt reports. Motion portant adoption de rapport. Councillor Leeper, please. Seconded by Councillor Curry.
That the report from Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc. entitled Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc. 2021 Annual Report, Audit Committee Report 15, Built Heritage Subcommittee Report 28, Community and Protective Services Committee Report 27, Joint Planning Committee and Community and Protective Services Committee Report 3, Finance and Economic Development Committee Report 39, Planning Committee Report 63, Transit Commission Report 19, and the report from the City Clerk entitled Summary of Oral and Written Public Submissions for items subject to the Planning Act explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of June 8th, 2022 be received and adopted as amended.
Carried. Adopté. Motions of which notice has been previously given. Motion dont avait été donnée entièrement. Councillor Dudas has a motion signed by Councillor Gower, please. Councillor Dudas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Being that I've read it out last time, I will just read the therefore be resolved that city staff during emergency situations provide more specific guidance to help direct community resources to where they are needed most. For example, donations to the Ottawa Food Bank, distribution of water, checks on neighbors. Be it further resolved that staff include lessons learned from this recent storm recovery effort and include them in future emergency preparedness training sessions for community groups and organizations. And be it further resolved that staff develop as part of these lessons learned a process to better direct community resources to support city efforts during an emergency.
Great. So signed by Councillor Gower. Carried. Adopté.
Carried.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. Next is motion by Councillor Eglai, seconded by myself. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I won't go through the whereases. I'll just read out therefore be it resolved that city staff and planning, real estate and economic development with support from legal services and bylaw and regulatory services prepare a report on the rules governing requirements for installation and maintenance of backup generators in multi-unit residential buildings with elevators, as well as at gas stations, and identify what regulatory changes would be required to ensure a more consistent and widespread use. I asked City Clerk to share a letter provided to me by one of my residents. He would have received it last night, Lynn Ashdown. I'm not going to read the whole letter, Mr. Mayor, but just a quick quote from it. This was a resident that was stuck in her apartment for many days without access to an elevator, without access to power. There were, in that building, there were issues also with getting water to the upper floors. She wrote and said, it's about treating others as you would want to be treated and doing the right thing, not because a policy or law enforces it, but because it's just what you do to look after one another. And I think we heard something similar from Hydro this morning. A lot of the issues that we all dealt with through the aftermath of the storm in apartment buildings and in seniors' residences were related to the fact that there were no backup generators in some of these buildings. So people didn't have power, elevators were not working, and in some cases, water couldn't get up to the upper floors of buildings. That meant diversion of city resources, whether it was wellness visits through fire department or public health, the fire department trying to figure out how to get water to these upper floors of these buildings, bringing in food, paramedic visits for folks who couldn't access elevators or the elevators weren't working. Many of these things could have been avoided if individual owners of these buildings, companies that own these buildings, had backup generators in place. So I'd like to think that we will unanimously support this, but I wanted to put that human face on it. I wanted to read part of the feedback that I did receive from a resident with lived experience during this and the impact that it had on her and her feelings about how this could be addressed and more importantly, why it should be addressed. So I would ask for your support on this motion and thank you for the time, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much for the initiative. Councillor Brockington on this motion, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor Eglai and Your Worship for moving this motion. I will be supporting it for all the reasons that Councillor Eglai listed for us. With the indulgence of my colleagues, I do want to ask a question that deviates just slightly from this motion, but it's about generator use in general. I've had a lot of questions since the storm about generator use, and I'm just wondering if I could just ask them and then park it and get an answer later. And that is, in future emergencies like we've just gone through, there were questions raised about basically the 24-hour use of generators. They obviously create noise, but we see the many benefits of generator use. So members of the public, even condos, are asking, well, how do we accept this? And the other was the safety issues. And I think Roger Chapman from Bylaw did release a statement reminding members of the public about how to use and how not to use generators, regarding they need sort of an open aired area to do that. But I think going forward, it looks like more and more people are going to be using generators. They see the benefit of generators, and if power outages are going to be more common, I think as a city, we need to be clear about generator use in general. Maybe under certain conditions, there will be no noise restrictions in that regard. And also, I think better communication with respect to the safe use of generators. I'm just thinking in the winter, if this happens during an ice storm, people will be more likely to want to use it maybe in a closed garage. And there are obviously some safety issues in that regard. On the motion itself, I will be supporting. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much, and I thank my colleague for this motion. I tried to work on this issue in 2018 after I was elected, because during the outage of 2018, there were buildings where there was no electricity, no generators, no elevator use, and water couldn't get past the 6th floor because it's only gravity driven. So people couldn't even flush their toilets. It was that bad. I was appalled. It was interesting to hear from Bryce Conrad that he was gobsmacked about this as well, from Hydro Ottawa, that he didn't realize this happened. And I tried to look for ways through the city on building code, but apparently it's provincial, and it's kind of grandfathered in. It's older buildings. This was horrendous and frightening. People were going up with backpacks full of water to take it up to people in these over 20-story buildings. So something has to be done on these older buildings. And I was frustrated that I couldn't do it through the municipality means, but I would like to push very hard to see this fixed, because we can't go forward with this happening again. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I also just wanted to thank Councillor Eglai and yourself for bringing this motion before us. I saw a situation in the prolonged power outage where a long-term care facility lacked power for a tremendous period of time. They had a generator, but the generator was malfunctioning. And so I appreciate the fact that there is an element in this motion that also looks at the maintenance of backup generators to ensure that some of our most vulnerable residents during a prolonged power outage will have access to basic services. So I appreciate the fact that this is before us, and I thank you for bringing it to a vote for and to our consideration today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Curry, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to be clear. So this is just to prepare a report on the rules governing the use of it, and then what regulatory changes would be required. But we're not making anybody do anything. Like we're just getting a report on the information so a future council can decide what we might want to mandate.
Yeah, that's correct. And also, we don't have the authority, according to our legal staff, to require gas stations, for instance, a generator or apartments. So it would be seeking permission at some point after the report comes back. So this will be, the new council will have to deal with this.
Okay, just want to make sure we were clear on that nothing was going to change. We're just getting information on it.
That's right.
Great, thanks.
Just a question to Mr. Ayat. During the power outage, I happened to run into a volunteer firefighter, I think from Constance Bay, who surprised me to say that they didn't have a generator. Do not all our fire stations have generators? Is this an outlier?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Most of them are since the tornado, or actually the first blackout that we had at the turn of 2000. We started putting not all of our fire stations had generators. In fact, very few of them had. So we've gone through a capital project where we've actually started placing generators in all of our stations based on risk and response criteria, et cetera. We still have a few left to do, and I'd be happy to get those exact numbers for you if you need them.
Yeah, I think most people think if there's trouble that we'd head to a fire station, especially in rural Ottawa, because there's not police stations, obviously, in the rural parts. So I would hope that we would, have a plan to have some capacity for a generator in every fire station. So
yes,
hopefully that will get it.
We do have a plan for that, Mr. Mayor. We just haven't completed it yet.
Yeah, great. Okay. Councillor Eglai, to wrap up.
Just very quickly, just to respond to the comment from Councillor Curry, you're correct that it is asking staff to come up with a report with options and also to look at what changes might need to be made in regulations or legislation at the city or provincial level. But to your comment that nothing's going to change, I certainly hope something's going to change. I hope landlords are listening. I hope the operators of these homes are listening, and they'll be proactive rather than reactive and take steps now to avoid the situation in the future.
So on the motion as presented by Councillor Eglai, carried.
Carried.
Next motion is also by Councillor Eglai, seconded by Councillor Cloutier, regarding the tragedy that took place on Maryville Road. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to, with everybody's indulgence, I think it's important to read this one in its fullness. Whereas on January 13th, 2022, a catastrophic explosion occurred at 1995 Maryville Road. And whereas due to that catastrophic explosion, 6 lives were tragically lost. Their names are Kayla Ferguson, Rick Bastian, Danny Beal, H.M. Abila, Matt Kearney, and Russ McClellan. And whereas the City of Ottawa would be honored to commemorate the lives of these 6 people by creating a community space in Maryville Gardens Park, which would include 6 trees, 1 for each of the victims, a plaque. And whereas the City of Ottawa does not currently have a policy or guidelines on commemorations of this nature, and whereas Public Works, Parks Maintenance, and Forestry Services can fund the purchase of the commemorative trees and installation costs, and whereas the families of Kayla Ferguson, Rick Bastian, Danny Beal, H.M. Abila, Matt Kearney, and Russ McClellan have been notified and are supportive of this commemoration, and therefore be it resolved that Council approve the commemoration in Maryville Gardens Park in memory of those who tragically perished in this explosion. And be it further resolved that an appropriate plaque be installed to commemorate this tragic event. And be it further resolved that all costs related to the production and installation of the plaque and any subsequent event will be funded through the Ward 9 Constituency Services budget and other costs from the commemoration to be funded by the applicable departments within existing budgets. I don't really have much to add to that. I think it speaks for itself, colleagues, and would ask for your support.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor, for initiating this. It's a very thoughtful gesture to remind ourselves that we lost these citizens. And you and I had an opportunity to go to a small gathering just after the tragic death of these individuals. And I thank you very much for bringing this particular initiative forward. I think this is probably, certainly in recent memory, the worst accident of its kind in our history. And these individuals obviously, like we say, every day of mourning, every year, they go out the front door, say goodbye to their loved ones, and we just assume they'll come back home. And in this case, these individuals, unfortunately, did not come back home. And our sympathies continue to be with the family members of those who passed and a number who were seriously injured and are still being treated for those burns. So thank you for doing this. On the motion, carried.
Carried.
The next motion is by Councillor King, seconded by Councillor Brockington with respect to the storm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Colleagues, I read this motion into the record the last meeting, but I introduced this motion so that the city can formally ask Hydro Ottawa to propose several solutions so that the city can better deal with extended power outages if they occur at scale again. The motion before you today, seconded by Councillor Brockington, asks the CEO of Hydro Ottawa to provide an action plan to improve communication with the community during prolonged power outages, including neighborhood-specific information. While I fully acknowledge that Hydro Ottawa worked nonstop to restore power for 110,000 customers and should be commended for its response to the massive level of damage inflicted by the May long weekend storm, which is indicative of the continuing climate challenges to come. The storm does demonstrate the need for a plan to examine vulnerabilities in the local power grid and for city staff to consider better coordination of Hydro Ottawa crisis communications with city-run systems. The intent of the following motion, of this motion, is to improve the experience of residents and hydro ratepayers by formally asking Hydro Ottawa how future power outages of extended periods will be addressed and asking for grid modernization so that citizens are more aware of when power outages are likely to be resolved. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor. On the motion, carry and update. Next is a motion by Councillor Brockington, seconded by Councillor Luloff, and I believe there's a note, Councillor Brockington, that the motion changed slightly. So if you could highlight that for us, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, this is one of two motions, commemorative naming motions I am moving today. And thank you to Councillor Luloff for seconding. The first is with respect to a commemorative naming for the late Anita Mitchell and David Mitchell. This is the weight room naming in the Hunt Club Riverside Park Community Center. I'll flag for council the changes or modifications to this motion of the last two therefore statements. An omission on my part. There are costs associated with the plaque and a small reception, which my office budget will cover. So those are the additions. I just want to say, in addition to what is spelled out in the motion, that the Mitchells are fantastic people, the late Anita Mitchell and David's still with us. I don't want the word late to imply that both have passed, but David Mitchell is still a resident of Hunt Club and still contributes. And they've been fantastic residents and contributors to the neighborhood and greater Ottawa community. And it was moved by a resident of the community who knows this family well and thinks that this would be a great commemorative naming to honor their service. And so it's backed by the family, it's backed by the community association, and has my strong support. Thank you, Mayor.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor. On the motion, carried and update. Next is a motion also from Councillor Brockington, seconded by Councillor Luloff. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, colleagues, the addition of the modification to this motion is exactly the same as the one we've just dealt with. It's spelling out that costs associated with the commemorative plaque and reception costs will be funded through my office. So those are the changes compared to when this was first introduced. Linda Dodd is, the community resident everyone wants to have in their community. She was a fantastic woman, engaged in so many local and citywide initiatives, and really loved, and I think is a great example of what Carlington has been over many years. Her absence in the community has been felt, and there is strong support to recognize her efforts and contributions to the community. And with the renewal of the gazebo in Herald Place Park, which is a park in northern Carlington, part of the veterans community, that this was an ideal location for this commemorative naming. So we're very much looking forward to gathering this summer and honoring the memory of a great woman.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. On the motion, carried and update. The next motion is by Councillor DeRuse, seconded by myself. And there's an additional motion from Councillor DeRuse on this item. This is a leftover legacy challenge from the former township of Osgood. Councillor DeRose, if you'd like to introduce the motion to help resolve this long-standing issue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's whereas the former township of Osgood entered into agreement with Catwave Realty Inc. to develop an estate lot subdivision considering of 3 phases, known as Country Hill Estate. And whereas the city of Ottawa has inherited and maintained the rights and responsibility of the former township, including profit sharing, and whereas the participation as a developer of a residential subdivision is a unique situation, and whereas the first 2 phases has been developed and the 3rd phase is on the final stages of the approval process, and whereas the subdivision agreement called for ditches to be constructed with topsoil and grass seeds, whereas in 2008, after many of the building lots has been sold to city, the city's formally accepted gravel and stone ditches in the 2nd phase of development in accordance with Ontario Provincial Standard Drawing 205050 due to rocky condition and concerns related to potential erosion of topsoil within the ditches, and whereas this has been continuous point of contention with the resident of Country Hill Estate, and whereas the owner and developer of this subdivision, the city has a responsibility to these homeowners, and whereas the lots within the 3rd phase has not yet been sold and will provide revenues to the city as they are sold, therefore be it resolved the city staff be directed to implement a compensation funding program for property owner within the 2nd phase of Country Hill Estate to align with the terms of the subdivision agreement that would follow the principal outline in the attached document, which is Country Hill Estate Ditch Compensation Funding Program. You have it all in front of you. Mr. Mayor, this is a unique situation. The City of Ottawa owned subdivision, which will never happen at this time, at this council. This is something we inherited back from Osgood Township, and we're trying to correct it. Staff has been working amazing with our community and with our residents to fix this conflict and making sure they're treated like anybody else in the city. And we finished that subdivision, and we move forward with our life. So it is all highlighted in front of you. I hope we get the support from all of you.
And Councillor, can you introduce your second motion as well, because it relates to this one?
Yes, and the second motion, Mr. Mayor, is very short, and it's also from the same subdivision, also concerning the park. Whereas the subdivision agreement in the Country Hill Estate provided dedication of a 6.59 hectare park block when it was registered in 1999, and whereas the subdivision agreement did not allocate any requirement or funding for the construction of the park, and whereas neither tax nor development charge funding has ever been allocated for the construction of this park, and whereas the local parks are now funded through the developer build model, and whereas the subdivision agreement provided that the park block could be sold as long as the funds generated were be allocated to fund recreation within Osgood Township. Therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to pursue the further division of rezoning of the park block to create one or more building lot in keeping with the official plan policy to generate revenue for the construction and development of a park on a smaller retained portion for the park block. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Leeper, questions or comments?
Thanks, Mayor. Can I just ask for someone to take me through the point of contention here? The owners in phase 2 are upset because they have a more expensive ditch that they have paid for.
So Mayor, this file goes back many, many years. I've been working with Councillor DeRose on it since I joined the city. It's been a long-standing trying to resolve concerns, and we think we have a resolution. So pre-amalgamation, the former township of Osgood got itself into a joint venture deal on the development of a country estate residential subdivision. The purchasers on phase 2 believe a promise was made to them about the condition of how their front yard ditches would be treated. And because of the rock conditions, we normally would permit, and any new development would expect kind of bare rock conditions because the soil would wash away. But they believe and are prepared to continue to persist against the city that a promise was made. So the promise was made in this phase, they believe, to have a landscaped condition. So this is a settlement to resolve all outstanding claims against the city and try to bring this matter to an end. The second part of it has to do with the provision of a piece of park. So we're advancing the construction to an earlier point with respect to phase 3. We're going to use the revenues from the next lot sales in order to do this and bring this to an end with, I think, a good outcome with the community.
So they have outstanding legal claims?
Mayor, we're not at that point yet, but I could imagine the way things have gone, we could get there someday. And because this is a different situation, we're the developer in this situation. We're trying to bring peace to the situation without going to a legal settlement. So this has been been years in progress trying to find a solution that people will buy into.
But they haven't sued us yet?
Not at this point.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. So on the motions, both together, carried. Next is on little libraries, Councillor Gower.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to staff for their assistance in finding a temporary solution to a small issue in Stittsville regarding little free libraries. And thank you to Councillor Eglai for seconding this little motion. Therefore, be it resolved that Council directs staff in the Planning, Real Estate and Economic Development Department, the Public Works Department, and Emergency and Protective Services to jointly review the feasibility of alternate approaches to permitting little free libraries while still maintaining the objectives of relevant city bylaws, with the report back to the appropriate standing committee in the next term of council.
On the motion, carried.
Carried.
Okay, thank you. Next is a motion by Councillor Leeper, seconded by Councillor Brockington on a very worthy recipient of a commemorative name.
Thank you very much, Chair or Mayor. Yes, so this is a commemorative renaming. If you will indulge me, I would like to read this out into the record. Whereas on July 24th, 2002, City Council approved as amended the commemorative naming policy. And whereas in keeping with its powers set out in Municipal Act 2001, Council may assign a commemorative name by resolution, notwithstanding the provisions included in the commemorative naming policy. And whereas Keith Brown, at age 92 years of age, is a lifelong resident of Mechanicsville, born and raised on Stonehurst Avenue across from LaRoche Park. And whereas Keith is a member of the Mechanicsville Community Association and president of the LaRoche Park Community Sports Association, and whereas the LaRoche Park Community Sports Association and Keith have annually flooded, maintained, and operated the outdoor rink at LaRoche Park since 1984, making Keith the longest serving rink volunteer in the city outdoor rink program. And whereas Keith has provided a life's worth of volunteerism and community involvement, operating the Tom Brown Arena concession for nearly 25 years, having coached both hockey and ball hockey for children and youth in the neighborhood, organized and coordinated community events, youth drop-in activities, hockey events, and so much more. And whereas Keith's community involvement reached beyond the borders of Mechanicsville and the surrounding neighborhoods, notably his decades of volunteer work with the Westboro Legion as an Air Force veteran during the Korean War. The Westboro Legion also nominated Keith, its Sergeant at Arms, for the Queen's Jubilee Medal for organizing the ceremonial tributes for veterans' funerals, selling poppies, visiting veterans in care at the Pearly Rito Veterans Care Center, Remembrance Day ceremonies, and Legion meetings and social events. And whereas Keith's love and passion for the community of Mechanicsville and LaRoche Park is inspirational and has provided numerous benefits for the community at large. Therefore, be it resolved that the field house located at LaRoche Park, 51 Stonehurst Avenue, be named the Keith Brown Community Building. And be it further resolved that an appropriate plaque be installed displaying the name and including a brief history of Keith Brown's contributions. And be it further resolved that all costs related to the production and installation of the plaque and subsequent event will be funded through the councillor's office. Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington, for seconding that.
Great. On the motion, carried. Adopted. Thank you. Next is Councillor Kavanaugh, seconded by Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has necessitated the redeployment of large numbers of public health personnel, resulting in core public health programs and services being reduced or halted. Whereas due to the pandemic response, public health services related to the care and management of patients covered under Ontario government-funded dental plans have been impacted, resulting in long waiting lists for care and significant unknown needs for urgent care. And whereas Public Health works in partnership with private dental practitioners that were also impacted for the provision of care to patients covered under government programs. And whereas the Ontario government has not raised fees paid to dental practitioners for their care since 1998, other than inflation adjustment in 2009, 2010, and currently pays fees at approximately 37% of the current Ontario Dental Association suggested fee guide, while overheads approximate 65 to 70%. And whereas, excuse me, I just lost my spot. And whereas it is essential public health continue to collaborate with dental community to resolve the urgent need for care for patients under the Ontario government funded dental programs. Whereas, whereas there is also remains a high need for Ontario government to reform these programs in consultation with the wider dental community while incorporating international standards and practices. Therefore, be it resolved that Ottawa Council requests that the Mayor write a letter to the Minister of Health of Ontario with a copy to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO, requesting that the Government of Ontario immediately increase funding for all Ontario government-funded dental programs up to 75% of current Ontario Dental Association suggested fee guide for general practitioners, and B, enter into discussions with the Ontario Dental Association on reform of the government-funded dental programs to reflect current international standards and best practices for such programs. And I want to thank Ottawa Public Health for their cooperation in working on this motion, and my colleague, Councillor Brockington, for seconding it.
Great. Des questions, commentaires? Carried. Adopté.
Yeah.
Next is a motion by Councillor Leeper, please, seconded by Councillor McKinney.
Thank you. I won't read the entire motion. One of the arts organizations in our ward has sought permission to close the street on an on-demand basis through the summer in order to be able to offer youth programming adjacent to La Roche Park, which is currently under renovation, as we just learned in great detail. So whereas the city, therefore, be it resolved that council approve the road closure for Lyndale Street from Hinchy Street to Carruthers Street for the Lyndale Youth Programming activities, provided it meets requirements, conditions, and approval of the Special Events Traffic Management Unit. And my thanks go to staff for working on a flexible closure regime.
On the motion, carried. Adopté. Motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure. Motion exigeant la suspension des règles de procédure. Councillor McKinney has a motion, seconded by Councillor Leeper, on the Ottawa China Night Market on suspension. Carried. Councillor McKinney, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'll read it out because it's asking for the rules to be suspended. Whereas Chinese Cuisine and Hospitality Association of Canada will host the annual Ottawa Chinatown Night Market event, and whereas many of the Ottawa Chinatown Night Market activities will be happening outdoors on Somerset Street between Bronson Avenue and Bell Street North, activities consist of an outdoor food festival to bring fun to the community with food tastings and cultural musical performances. And whereas the Chinese Cuisine and Hospitality Association of Canada has requested the closure of Somerset Street from Bronson Avenue to Bell Street North from 9:30 a.m. on Friday, the 22nd of July, 2022, to 8 p.m. Sunday, 24th of July, 2022. And whereas the on-street festival setup will commence at 9:30 a.m. and the festival will begin operation at 2 p.m. on Friday, 22nd of July, 2022. And whereas the City of Ottawa's special events on roads bylaw prohibits road closures before 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, therefore be it resolved that council approve the road closure of Somerset Street between Bronson Avenue and Bell Street North for the Ottawa Chinatown Night Market, providing it meets the requirements, conditions, and approval of the Special Events Advisory Team. And of course, you're all welcome.
Thank you. Question, commentaire, carried, adopté.
Carried.
The next motion requiring suspension of the rules is Councillor Brockington, seconded by Councillor Tierney on the Carlington Community Garden. On suspension, carried. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So whereas the Carlington Community Garden, which was one of the largest community gardens in the city, was relocated from the grounds of the Carlington Community Health Center due to the multi-year renovation and expansion to Carlington Park, whereas this relocation has meant the garden had to start from scratch with a planned phased-in approach over many years, whereas Section 37 funds under the Planning Act from a nearby development, which were to finance the expansion, phase 2 of the expansion of the community garden, are not yet available, such that expansion plans have been put on hold for this year. Whereas in the interim, the Carlington Community Garden is seeking $5,000 in one-time funds from my budget to pay for a garden shed at the current location. And whereas the community gardens receive city funding via the Community Gardening Network, whereas council expense policy provides that members of council may make contributions to community organizations subject to certain restrictions, including, unless otherwise approved by motion of council, contributions to individuals, businesses, or city-funded services and departments are prohibited. And unless otherwise approved by motion of council, contributions are limited to 3.5% of the member's annual constituency services budget. Whereas the requested contribution can be accommodated within the 2022 overall Ward 16 constituency services budget, therefore be it resolved that council approve an exemption to the council expense policy to permit Councillor Brockington to contribute up to $5,000 to the Carlington Community Garden from the 2022 Ward 16 constituency service budget, and be it further resolved that this contribution not be subject to the 3.5 donation limit.
Okay, on the motion, carry, adopté.
Thank you.
The next motion requiring suspension is by Councillor Fleury, seconded by Councillor Luloff with respect to the Lower Town Community Center. On suspension, carried. Councillor Fleury, if you want to just maybe read the whereas.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Whereas the Lower Town Community Center at 40 Coburg is a city-owned recreation facility in Lower Town, whereas the site of the community center also includes an adjoining building owned by Le Patro, whereas the city has leased portion of the community center at 40 Coburg to Le Patro for several decades with the requirement that the group manage the space as a municipal facility, open and available to meet broad community needs at the time. Whereas there has been community demand for better access to the community spaces and recreation program at the site to meet current needs beyond the primary mandate of Le Patro. Whereas the community center are generally open 7 days a week, including mornings on weekends and evenings during the week to maximize use of programming. And whereas Lower Town is Ottawa's lowest income community and where many young families continue to request need for sports and recreation spaces, whereas the city has indicated interest in playing a more active role in making the city spaces available for the community, for community activities and delivering the City of Ottawa recreation services. Therefore, be it resolved that staff of the Recreation, Culture and Facility Department be directed to explore new options, approaches, and contractual changes that would facilitate better community access to the city's own portion of the facility, and in particular, the gymnasium.
Okay, on the motion, carried. Next is a motion by Councillor Fleury, seconded by Councillor Leeper with respect to Byward Market right-of-way patios. On suspension, carried. On the motion, Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This relates to future planning years, so it's looking ahead. Whereas the council approved Byward Market Public Realm Plan envisions wide pedestrian corridors through the district, whereas this plan ensures the Byward Market remains a unique pedestrian-friendly destination in Ottawa and shifts the perception of the market from a vehicular-oriented space to one where pedestrian come first by rethinking the quality of the environment, including the urban tree canopy, seating, lighting, and paving, and how the spaces of the market can be interesting and active throughout the year. Whereas the Byward Market, the city and the community wish to continue to improve sidewalk spaces to meet accessibility needs and go beyond minimum clearway standards. Whereas it is imperative to find the right balance of animated streets through outdoor dining with the goal of robust pedestrian networks. Whereas the patio innovation program of the last 2 years has provided the opportunity to try new ways for restaurants to provide outdoor dining. Whereas the Byward Market is home to approximately 50% of the city's right-of-way patio permits. Whereas city has designated the new official plan, the Byward Market, as a special economic district and a high-level design priority area, which would have the highest level of public realm. Therefore, be it resolved that street side spots be the outdoor right-of-way patio preference for the district developed through the block-by-block strategy and informed by technical and safety consideration that may prevent their use in some situations. And be it further resolved that staff be directed to explore a partnership with Ottawa Markets, wherein beginning in 2023, they would partner with the city on the administrative of the patio program within the Byward Market and develop and implement a Byward Market patio standard with enhanced beautification and curation requirements. And be it further resolved that should an arrangement for 2023 be feasible, that the general manager, planning, real estate, economic development be delegated the authority to enter into this agreement with Ottawa Markets and report out on its terms to council via memorandum. I got there.
Okay, so once again from Councillor Fleury, carried. Okay. Yeas and nays. Any other motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure? Notice the motion for consideration of subsequent meeting. Avis de motion pour examen and réunion subséquente. Councillor Leeper, second by Councillor Kavanaugh on naming the pool at Dovercourt John Rapp Pool.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor. The Board of Directors has renamed the pool at Dovercourt Recreation Center, which is our physical asset for John Rapp, the Executive Director, who recently retired. And so the motion to be debated in a couple of weeks is therefore be it resolved that the Dovercourt pool located at 411 Dovercourt Avenue be named the John Rapp Pool.
Okay, we'll deal with that at the next meeting. Councillor Fleury on Bingham Park right-of-way.
Oui, désolé, c'est encore moi. Est-ce qu'on peut le voir à l'écran? Whereas Recreation, Cultural and Facilities are working on redevelopment plans for Bingham Park, whereas the Community and Ward 12 Council are planning a significant park renewal investments through CIL for Bingham Park, whereas the utility boxes in the park, which is the road right-of-way, have increased over the last number of years, which is not desirable, as Rito Vanney is the community with the least park space in all wards in Ottawa, whereas there are a number of existing utility pedestal clustered along the Cathcart right-of-way adjacent to the park near the corner of Cathcart Park and Dadouzy, whereas there is a desire to improve the aesthetic of the section of Cathcart Street by limiting the future potential for more utility pedestals. Therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to initiate the statutory process to close the portion of Cathcart Street between the inside edges of the sidewalk and the existing limits of Bingham Park encompassing the existing utility pedestal. Be it further resolved that the road closure planning application, the cost being $6,000, be funded through funding source to be determined. I'll bring that back to next council. And be it further resolved that following the road closure circulation, staff bring forward a report to Transportation Committee with the results of this circulation and detailing any financial implications. I don't believe that to be the right one.
Deputy Clerk, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair, the final version of the notice of motion submitted by the member indicated $6,000 to be funded through cash in lieu of parkland.
Correct. So we'll make sure that version is as a notice. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any other notice of the motion? Motion to introduce bylaws. Motion portant présentation de règlement. Councillor Leeper and Curry, please.
That the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws, 3 readings be read and passed.
Carried. Adopté. Confirmation bylaw. Councillor Leeper and Curry.
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting of June 22nd, 2022.
Carried. Inquiries, Councillor Fleury missed the opportunity to pull something from communication. So with the will of council, agreed. Councillor Fleury on 2 items on the.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, council, for this. Apologize for missing the communication agenda item. So my first question is on the first inquiry, which I have questions on. It relates to the city on the convoy, and is specific to the declaration of the state of emergency. And I guess I struggle. We're often caught in this governance where, you know, we heard it earlier today when from OPH, they, you know, the medical officer of health, for example, has their own authority, and their board have their own authority. But I guess I want some clarification as to council declared a state of emergency. Prior to that, we members of council kept being referred to, hey, this is a police-led effort. And I wonder, I'd like some clarification as to the urgency of the element and what tools council had throughout that could have given us a different outcome. Because I'm just not sure that we answered and responded to the province or the feds in an urgent matter as clearly as we should have, as early as we should have.
Mr. Ayat.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, good question. With regards to the state of emergency, it's not a council decision. It's the mayor's decision, and it falls within his jurisdiction, I guess. And also with regards to, you know, the need for it, I think that, you know, when we looked at it initially, you know, I'll make recommendations to the mayor, or I'll make recommendations to senior management with regards to how we proceed on that front, or whether we should or not. And there was always this impression that the convoy was going to leave. And in fact, initially they were going to leave, you know, they were going to be in town for 3 days. And then we were given information again through police resources and their liaison officers that well, they may stay a little longer, but they're going to leave by February 2nd. So, you know, once it became very clear that they were entrenched and that the situation was getting more dire, then, you know, I think that was the time to react. And that's why, you know, not only the recommendation, but the mayor made decision on February 6th to actually declare the state of emergency.
Okay. Just two other points or 2 other questions. So in the response to the inquiry, there's a lot of reference, which, you know, I think is partly of the problem here, to the police command. And I wonder, so as members of council, EPS center was struck, is my understanding, and we have our own bylaws. So we have our own communication at the city. We have our own public safety environment through our bylaws, through our road closures. And I struggle to understand how our own authority locally had some tools other than under the police command. Could that be clarified?
It was a police-led emergency. The police are responsible for public order and peace, keeping the peace. And it was their responsibility during a protest to actually do that. With regards to our involvement, the city is supportive of the police with regards to making sure that the city services that are maybe impacted by this are being, you know, communicated and that they're well coordinated. So all along, it was a police matter, and we were there to support and deal with consequence management.
Okay. I do think that is I don't know, Mr. Kanalakis, if there is an internal review of process and stuff, but there seems to be a big tangle point between when something is police-led and what we have as council members and what traditionally we have as tools. I'm not asking for a resolution on the floor of council, but it does.
Just for clarification, Councillor, you recall Councillors Hambly and Tierney had a motion that in essence wanted to do a post-mortem analysis of what went well and what didn't go so well. And that was directed to the Auditor General, who is now working on that initiative. But I think she's going to be communicating, giving an update sometime next week. with respect to her work, because her work has taken a bit of a jaunt to the side because of the federal inquiries that are also taking place. So I don't think Councillor Hambly and Tierney want them to duplicate efforts. So I think what she's trying to do is figure out when that's going to come to some conclusion, how she can do more of an analysis, I believe, on the Ottawa reaction. So that's the latest I received from Councillors Tierney and Hambly.
And Mr. Mayor, I appreciate that. I did have a conversation with the OAG on this matter, both here and for the police board. And her reference was for members of council to use their inquiry and response as a baseline and not rely on her review. So that, I mean, that's why I'm raising it. Maybe as a final point, so as a local councillor, I rely heavily. And when I came into office 10 years ago, that was one of the folks that were leaving, the Jacques Legendre and so on, and Alex Cullen were saying, be lucky that the 311 system's in place. We used to have those calls, and the majority of it are just ticket creation and dispatch. Now we find ourselves a decade later through an emergency, and what I learned is that the intake to 311 and the police systems and so on didn't address specific concerns, and I'm left to say, well, what tools do I have as a local councillor? If someone calls 311, a ticket is created, but then we're not following on that individual request in an environment like an occupation, how do I know of that localized issue and public safety environment? So I'm not looking for an answer, but I am identifying what I believe to be a challenge during, could have been the outage, could be the occupation, where it's important that 311 track and continue to create those tickets and follow up individually to those requests.
I think it may be something you might want to take offline with Mr. Kanalakis to get his take on that. Okay, so confirmation bylaw, Councillor Leeper, please.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I have the other inquiry, and these would have been dealt at CPS, but we had a joint committee and we referred it to council. So it's questions that I would have asked that committee.
But are these not inquiries that you submitted?
The inquiries I submitted, I met with staff on the response, and I do think it's of public interest to discuss it.
My understanding was that it was not dealt with at CPS because it was a pretty overwhelming agenda.
Correct.
I would suggest then why don't you just we'll refer that back so you can
sure.
the public can speak to it at the same time. So
sure.
Maybe we'll refer that inquiry back to CPS. Deputy
families and in motels.
By Councillor Fleury, seconded by myself. Agreed. Great. Okay. Councillor Meehan, do you have? I don't have a written inquiry. Do you have a verbal inquiry?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had submitted it. I typed it out and submitted it to. Oh, there it is. Do you want me to read it in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. That I respectfully request that Dr. Etches and Ottawa Public Health, along with the Director of Long-Term Care, determine the status of conditions in municipally operated and private long-term care homes and retirement homes in Ottawa. What issues exist, if any, in terms of COVID responses, isolation frequency when lockdowns are required, overall staffing levels, changes in full-time and part-time staff, assessment of feeding routines, preparedness for power outages, air conditioning, etc. We need to know the issues if we are to address them. Our most vulnerable need us to be paying attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Confirmation bylaw, Councillor Leeper, please.
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting of June 22nd, 2022.
Carried. Adopté. Adjournment, Councillor Leeper and Curry.
That the proceedings of the city council meeting of June 22nd, 2022 be adjourned.
Carried. Meeting adjourned, and